If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
For those who live near cemeteries or explore haunted, abandoned places and graveyards, have you ever encountered a paranormal presence, evil entity, shadow figure, or ghost? Share your story.
Guarding a witch's grave. My uncle works as a groundsman for the local council. He does what's needed, from cutting the grass of local parks to digging graves. One year he was asked to guard the grave of Molly Lee on Halloween to stop people from attempting to disturb her. The legend goes if you run around her grave near the apple tree, she will rise from her grave and attack. What makes her so special? She was buried as a witch, face down in her grave and north to south rather than in unison with the other graves. As the story goes, Molly Lee was a known witch who kept a pet blackbird. She was known to be quirky and kept to herself. When she died, she was buried as normal and laid to rest. The parson who buried her decided to be brave after a drink in the inn and go explore her cottage. However, when they entered, there was Molly Lee, the woman they just buried, sitting in the armchair by the fire with her pet nearby. The party turned and fled, and over the coming days there was an abundance of reports of her haunting local townspeople, so they dug her grave up, threw the blackbird in the grave with her, and reburied her, this time placing her coffin face down and turning it 90 degrees so it lay north to south in an attempt to stop the reported hauntings and to lay her spirit to rest. If you look back through the church records, the parson wrote at the time about having to rebury her after she rose from her grave. So even now, nearly 500 years later, they still won't allow any disturbances near her grave in fear of angering her spirit. I always check these. My grandparents lived across the street from a huge cemetery outside of Baltimore. I used to play there with the neighborhood kids, and one evening we played a version of hide and seek. I managed to climb up on top of a crypt to hide. It was just getting dark, and I heard someone talking, so I peeked over the edge. There were two teenagers. The girl was looking straight up at me and started to scream, then ran with the guy chasing after. It's been 40+ years. I wonder if I'm her ghost in the cemetery story. The ghosts on the railroads. So when I was a young kid, I was like 5. My grandma, along with my tia, took me, my sister, who we will call Cassie, and my cousin, who we will call Gabby, to an empty part of Texas, no people, just trees, their leaves turning golden and orange. My grandma starts telling us a story of the last time she and my tia came here. They saw something similar to the headless horseman, only with no horse. Nearby are railroad tracks. I heard from my grandma that those tracks are haunted. She starts to tell another story about how a school field trip went totally wrong and something like this happened. Long ago, while taking a field trip, the driver parked in the middle of the tracks. A train came into the children's view. The children and teacher screamed at the driver to move, but the exact opposite happened. The bus didn't move. Instead, the train crashed into the bus, killing all inside, and now the children, who are now ghosts, push in unison any car stuck on those tracks. We got to the tracks, and we got out of the car to explore a bit. The setting was dead silent except for the sounds of rattles and the chirping of birds. It was actually peaceful walking around. When we were done exploring, we were about to head back to my grandma's trailer when we got into her car. We were tired and very hungry. When my grandma attempted to start the car, it did not after a few attempts. She got to realize that we are very indeed ducked. We got out of the car and started signaling people who passed by to help us out, but no, they always pretended not to see us. We were there for hours on end until this one guy riding his bike said he would return in a car and with jumper cables. While we waited in the car, we heard unusual noises, such as people walking on the gravel and the leaves. The car starts to move. Cassie and Gabby are scared shitless, screaming in fear. My tia is just like my grandma, both are frozen in fear and shock. I was scared shitless as well, on the verge of tears. The car stops moving, and the engine comes back alive. My grandma stormed out of there. When we arrived at her home, we went to see the back of her car, and to our surprise, pairs of tiny handprints were on my grandma's car. When I was 13, late 1970s, we had a sleepover at a friend's house. She had this weird Ouija board. It was this tripod thing with a pendulum, and it swung and magnetically clicked and held to point at the letters arranged in a circle around the bottom. You would place your fingers on the metal ring at the bottom. No movement was required at all. Anyway, being 13 and stupid, my friend comes up with the idea that we should take it to this really creepy old cemetery across from our middle school. It was an unusual cemetery for Texas, as it had a bunch of crypts above ground. So she places the Ouija on one of the crypts, and we all gather round. The minute we all get a finger on the bar, it goes nuts. The pendulum is spinning around, and this big wind comes out of nowhere, causing the Ouija board to fly off into the grass. We screamed and ran all the way back to her house. Her mom made her go back the next day, but they didn't find it, and her mom was ticked. Hey there. Grew up in northern Utah. Here's some good stuff to research. The Case Cross, a big stone cross that used to be by the Kaysville Cemetery that has since been torn down. Supposedly it has old cult connections, and the area still attracts some trouble. Rumors say the man who built it ended his wives and buried them there. Others say it was just built by a religious eccentric trying to start his own church/sect. The Ben Lomond Hotel, Ogden, an old hotel that used to be called the Bigelow Hotel, is reputed to be haunted. Famous ghost story involving the ending of a woman on her honeymoon along with some other similar incidents. St. Anne's Retreat, the Nunnery, Logan, an old place out in the woods that used to be a summer camp, was later donated to a church and turned into an unwed mother's home. Rumored nuns would go there to hide pregnancies. Rumors of demonic entities. Hobbs Pond/Reservoir, Layton across the street from where I grew up was Hobbs Pond. It's had a sad past of swimmer deaths. Something about an undertow and debris that people get caught in has claimed the lives of even the strongest swimmers. People claim it's haunted. I don't personally know of ghost stories, but as a kid I remember people dying there and it getting closed off to the public. It's now open for fishing, but swimming will always be prohibited. Ogden Cemetery, it is rumored there is a ghost in Ogden Cemetery. They call her Flo, real name Florence Grange, and if you flash the lights of your car onto her grave 3 times, her ghost will appear and come towards you. There are a few for you to look into. I don't think I have any Farmington specific ones, but I have heard that Lagoon has some haunts. Happy hunting. I camped at a burial site. A few years ago, my family and I went fishing/camping in the same area we usually go to, but I guess it was occupied, so we settled in the nearest empty space that could fit 2 trailers. For the first 2 days, we focused on fishing at the lake and didn't venture out to explore the surrounding area. But when we did, it was me and my grandpa looking at the scenery, specifically, a small stream that I thought looked nice. However, as we got closer, I felt increasingly uncomfortable and nervous, although I couldn't understand why. That was until we found a small grave. I'd say it was about a foot long, the type a small dog or some sort of animal could fit in. The dirt in it looked fresh, or at least noticeably more dug up compared to the moss and grass around it, and it had a cross made out of sticks standing at the top of it. Next to the grave was a shovel that looked a lot older than the grave itself. It was really rusty and looked chipped at the edge. It honestly scared me a bit, and I just wanted to leave the site alone then and there, but my grandpa wanted to look around more. I stayed away from there for the rest of the trip. I didn't want to touch or disturb anything. My grandpa, on the other hand, took the shovel. I don't know why he took the shovel, but I believe he still has it. Weird ghost encounter in cemetery. So my friend and I are really into paranormal stuff. Like ghosts and anything strange and unexplained. We went to a local cemetery at night to ghost hunt and see if we would run into anything. We were especially excited because my dad had told us about a weird light thing he saw in the same cemetery not long before my friend and I decided to go. My brother, who doesn't really take an interest in the paranormal, came with us, and we were mainly just joking around with each other most of the time. We weren't really taking things seriously anymore, and it just turned into a walk around the place. We were coming down a road that led to a T intersection on the cemetery roadways. At that end was a white shack where I assume tools for groundskeeping purposes are kept. Next to that shack was a streetlight, and during this time, that half of the block had the sprinklers turned on. As we were coming to the intersection, I spotted a gray figure walking along the grass by the shack parallel to the road. I legitimately thought at first that it was someone else, so I didn't say anything at first to my friend. But I realized that a person wouldn't just be walking through the sprinklers as it was. The thing was just walking slowly and lazily, kind of slouched in its posture. As we approached, the creature walked past the streetlight's illumination and remained somewhat visible for a moment before it completely vanished. When we finally reached the intersection, I looked over that whole block. There were only a few trees, and didn't see a sign of anyone at all. I'm not sure why I didn't point it out to my friend and brother as we were walking, because they were both either looking off at something else or on their phones. Anyway, I was sort of surprised that night, and I wasn't able to get an explanation for what happened. I told my parents, who are also into paranormal stuff, and they were pretty surprised and amazed too. I thought I would share my experience here. My ghost story. So I have lived near St. Stephen's Cemetery and Church in Attleboro, Massachusetts, for around 30 years. I grew up around and playing in the cemetery. I have gone into the cemetery many times at night and seen nothing. This cemetery made it onto Unsolved Mysteries. And this sparked massive interest. I can remember cars being lined up and down my street. All these people came to see the glowing stone. It no longer glows. But I have seen it. But it stopped out of the blue one day, or rather out of the green, as it glowed green. Regardless, I have heard fantastical stories about sightings and similar events. But never me, I never had any experiences. 20 years later I did have an experience. My friend had passed due to a motorcycle accident. My friends and I decided at 3 a.m., or so, that we had had enough liquid courage and ventured into the cemetery. In hushed whispered voices, the 7 of us ventured into the back of the cemetery. This is the oldest part and the section closest to the 10-mile river. My friends and I stop at the crossroads before a small stretch of road that leads to a clearing and woods. My friend SP says, "I'm going into the woods." His girl C follows. That leaves 5 standing at the crossroads. We whisper and giggle and say how it would be funny if. Then we hear it. A little girl's laughter. Ice fights the warm sensation in my veins from the alcohol. No one says a ducking word. Now the girl's laugh is interesting, as I have never heard anything like this. It started at 2 o'clock and continued all the way around us in about 5 seconds, max, to the 11 o'clock position. It was not an echo. We stood there uneasy and waited, speechless. As SP and C came back to the group, I had to see. I asked C, "Hey C, what was so funny?" With a deadly serious flat effect, she said, "Nothing, but I heard it too." My friend SP was the only one not to hear anything. It is an amazing experience and one that baffles my mind to this day. Something followed me home. This is by far the scariest thing I've experienced. Where my boyfriend used to live at his mom's, he's moved out now. It was like a new build complex, with lots of new houses and roads, like its own little village, built around a mental asylum. They knocked the majority of it down, but what remained was the admin building, the church, and a large garden. We'd walk the dogs in the garden at night, and I always got feelings in there, kind of in my shoulders, like something was behind me or watching me. It never felt malicious, but it creeped me out all the same. Being the adventurous people we are, we decided to explore the admin building, so we gathered a few friends and headed off. This was during the day, as it was guarded at night. Getting inside involved lots of climbing through windows and up scaffolding to get inside. Once in, we split off and explored, but it was in such a state of ruin we didn't get too far. I found some stairs down to another floor and stood there for a while. I heard footsteps up the stairs and did a runner. I told the guys, and they were on the other side of the building, so it definitely wasn't them. We kept hearing doors slamming, but it was a calm sunny day. Thoroughly creeped out, we left and just explored the grounds and some other smaller buildings. When we got home I was absolutely exhausted, like really drained, but didn't think much of it. The next night I was back at home and settling down to sleep, but I couldn't get comfortable. I could feel something watching me from the end of my bed. I tossed and turned trying to ignore it, but I could feel it staring. I got really upset and started crying. It was so intense. I then got a thought in my head, "You came to stare at me, so I'm staring at you." I bolted into my parents' room next door and told them. They calmed me down, and when I went back to bed, it was gone. Another time we were in the garden late at night with a friend, and as usual I could feel something there. My boyfriend and his friend were facing me, while I was facing them. At the other end of the garden, I saw what looked like arms and the tops of legs walking behind a sort of archway in the garden. It was almost see-through white and walked for about 5 seconds before I told the guys. Of course, the figure had disappeared by the time they turned around. The garden has got high walls all round, so it definitely wasn't a car, and there was no one else there. That place is definitely haunted. I did some research, and the residents at the unit used to visit the garden and spend a lot of time in there. They weren't treated well, and they still used all the old-fashioned treatments for mental health and learning disabilities. We haven't been back since, as my boyfriend doesn't live with his mom anymore. I've always experienced the paranormal, and I'm open to sensing spirits. Honestly, being followed was the scariest thing I've experienced. A weird thing that happened to me a few years ago. I remember being at my cousin's house for the weekend when I was about 13, and we were outside playing at sunset. Everything was fine until we heard a roaring sound that resembled a human roar. In my cousin's neighborhood, there was a wall of trees that was the entrance to a giant field that we assumed was abandoned farmland, so we would sometimes go in there for fun. We cut through the trees to see what made the noise, and we saw a really tall man who looked quite bulky and seemed to be painted gray. He was pulling a tree and roaring until he pulled it down and started freaking out and jumping everywhere. My older brother asked him if he was okay, and he looked over at us and began sprinting on all fours towards us while roaring. We quickly panicked and crawled back through the trees, and we got my uncle, who grabbed his shotgun, and we led him back to the field, but once we got there, the creature was nowhere to be seen. That memory still freaks me out to this day. I've lived next to a cemetery for 10 years. I wish I could say I have a crazy story, but I don't, but I've seen things I can't explain. First of all, the cemetery I live next to is a beautiful spot next to a river. It's maintained weekly by the municipality of the small town I live in. I often took walks through it in the evenings and at night. I never believed in ghosts or anything of that nature until my late teens. The most notable experience I had was in my late teens when a friend and I were going to go fish behind the cemetery. This was a mutual experience, so I know I'm not crazy. We were walking on the pavement halfway through the cemetery when we saw an older gentleman at our spot. This man was not dressed in either of the eras. He was wearing an old-timey hat, a gray flannel, a fly fishing or fishing vest, and a pair of blue jeans. After both of us seeing him, we decided we'd feel him out to see if he didn't mind us fishing close to him. We saw him up to about his knees since there was a down-sloped bank. As we got to our spot, we realized the man was not there. It's impossible to fall in and drown in this river also since the max depth is 3 to 5 feet. My childhood best friend turned pale and stuttered. We were both in shock, as not only did we both see him, but we also decided to confront him and feel him out. The story doesn't end here. Since we were both freaked out and this was summer break, we opted to go back to my house since my parents were gone and discuss what the hell just happened. We were sitting in my living room for about 5 minutes when all of a sudden we heard loud banging and what literally sounded like excessive human clapping from the other end of my house. I'm getting the chills even writing this. The sound lasted for about 10 to 20 seconds before stopping. We didn't stick around to investigate it either. The same night my stepfather's radio in the garage turned on and up to max volume with pure static. This happened on several random occasions over the months afterwards, leaving my stepdad to unplug it and put it in the attic. I've seen my fair share of humanoid-type figures lasting a few seconds at a time, but nothing compares to that day my friend and I encountered the mysterious fishing man. Everything I saw up until then I chalked up as my eyes playing tricks on me. That whole experience wasn't a trick. When my son was little, we lived in an apartment next to a wooded walking path. The path also wound through a cemetery. We went for long walks on it every single night. This was very routine. He was barely 3, so he had no idea what the cemetery was. He never had any issues, and then all of a sudden one evening he starts freaking out, crying and hysterical, saying, "We have to get out of here, they don't want us here." He was just so adamant, it was like there was just truly a bunch of people there that I couldn't see and he could. He was in a stroller, and I ran as fast as I could to get us out of there. Once we were out of the cemetery and just back on the walking trail, a police car came up the path slowly, which was weird because this wasn't even a place for vehicles at all. The cop asked if I'd seen anyone while we were out walking, to which I said no. He then informed me they were looking for someone who might be dangerous and that we needed to get home. We were close, we could see our apartment from where we stood, and the cop said he was going to watch us until we were inside. The whole thing scared the crap out of me. I told this story once, and someone pointed out that ghosts in the cemetery probably knew we were in danger and scared my son to get us to go to safety. Nice way to think of it. Not quite a ghost story, but it's a somewhat paranormal adventure of my youth. Probably not what you're looking for, though. I grew up on Hill Air Force Base. There was a rumor that Satanists could be found just outside the base if you followed a water drainage pipe far enough. I was 13, and I and half a dozen other friends decided to go find out for ourselves. We loaded ourselves up with weapons, BB guns, machetes that older brothers owned, etc., and flashlights. There was no grate covering the pipe, and it was about 4 feet in diameter, so we had to duck a bit even at that age. It was a straight shot, and we went in so far that the daylight from the entrance was no longer visible. It felt like at least half a mile or more. Finally the straight shot veered left slightly, and at that corner was a broken wall leading to another part of the sewer, which was just water drainage this whole time, no poop or pee. We squeezed our way through, and the walls were littered with graffiti. Lots of satanic symbols and the like. We also found an exit not too far and discovered we were outside of the whole base. So we not only found the evidence we were looking for but also that they could sneak into the base if they wanted to. We didn't do anything with that info. Deep down we really knew it was just other teens being edgelords, though we didn't have a word for that at the time. Looking back, that was a really stupid thing to do. Especially since we didn't tell anyone what we were doing or where we were going. Later that night we stayed at one of the friends' houses, and we learned his mother didn't let him or his sisters out of the house on May's Eve since that was supposedly another Satanist holiday. He also lived near a graveyard, Layton, so that night we snuck out, with more weapons, of course, and psyched ourselves into a blissful, terrorized frenzy as we ran around the graveyard in the dead of night. Hearing horses whinnying all around us only fueled our dread. It's been over 30 years, but those are still some cherished memories to this day. When I was 8 years old, I used to accompany my mother to the cemetery to visit my great-grandfather. There I remember talking a lot with a girl who said she was my friend. Even my mother got to see her, and on one of those visits she invited me to her house, but I never accepted until one day I did, and she showed me that it was a grave that she considered home, so I got very scared and went back to my mother. After that I never saw her again. This happened in 2009. At that point in my life, I always loved ghost hunting videos and wanted to do it myself. I'd done plenty of ghost tours, but never actually any ghost hunting. There was a local ghost hunting group that was accepting paid entry to ghost hunt with them. They provided the equipment and everything. It was at a huge old cemetery. Before becoming a cemetery, it was the site of a battlefield. Took forever walking through it. A few things happened to me. I brought an audio recorder with me and listened to it afterwards. 1. There was a child section of the cemetery. I saw one with toy trucks on it. I decided to say out loud, "Are these toys your family brought you? Can I take a picture?" In the audio afterwards, you clearly hear a kid say yes and no to the questions. 2. I was walking around. We all separated into groups of 2 or 3, and the leader of the group would walk around interacting with us. I was by this odd-looking tree taking pictures and all of a sudden, felt this strong heavy weight on my head. The same type of feeling as if someone were pushing down on your head from above. I acted quickly, took a step forward, turned around, and quickly snapped a photo of where I was standing before. I was using a digital camera, so I saw the photo immediately, and there was a huge orb above where I was just standing seconds before. The guide came up to us not long after the picture, I didn't tell anyone, and told us that someone was ended being shot in the head by this tree. A few other things happened, like EVPs and something caught on camera, but those two I mentioned were the most directly interactive experiences of the night. Cemetery spirits. This is my experience from around 10 years ago, but it is one I have yet to find any concrete way to debunk to this day. Suggestions are more than welcome. Greenwood Memorial Lawn and Mortuary in Phoenix, Arizona. A friend of mine and I were scouting locations for a student film project for my college. The main scene was to take place in a cemetery, so we looked at the main ones around the city. We looked at the oldest and largest we knew in the city. This one has gravestones that are crumbling, askew, large, and small, a few mausoleums, and even graves that had been dug up and robbed. At 10 acres in size, it held both old graves and newer flat grave marker graves. So, we went with that one. Instead of doing the smart thing and contacting the front office about using it, we drove there one night to get some location photos. The gates were locked shut, and the cemetery was pitch black even with the light of the streetlights just on the other side of the wall. We parked across the street and crossed the road to one of the main gates. There, I held my camera through the gate bars and snapped some photos with the flash on. When I lowered it, my friend and I both noticed a man standing over a grave about 50 feet from where we were standing. He was slightly hunched over, hands pocketed in some sort of jacket. His legs were hidden by the gravestones around him. We called out to him, asking if he was maybe the night guard. He looked over to us, but instead of regular eyes, we saw 2 glowing orbs staring back at us. We ran as fast as we could back to the car and took off. When I got home and developed the photos, we did not see him in any of them. But what we did see, peeking from behind a gravestone, was a little girl. I went back a week later to where she was and found it to be the grave of a 10-year-old girl who had died of influenza. I could not pinpoint the man, sadly. The cemetery is well known for paranormal activity and just being downright unsettling to look at, and the businesses around have stories to tell. Bachelor Grove Cemetery, saw the famous lady in white. It's been a few years since I went, but I remember like it was yesterday a group of friends decided to go in the middle of the night to Bachelor Grove. It was around 12:30 when we entered the path, and I and a friend both heard a faint scream coming from deep in the woods. I heard it and instantly stopped dead in my tracks. As it was nighttime and we knew of police presence, we decided to use the faint light of my phone flashlight to continue further despite my gut telling me to turn back. We continued on the path for about 5 minutes until I felt and saw this white shadow/mist rush towards me. All my friends witnessed this, it stopped us in our tracks. This was our first time going, so we were unaware of the location of the cemetery, but as we were freaking out, I realized we were right at the entrance. I now believe this was the ghost in the white dress we saw. After hanging out and smoking a quick J to ease our nerves, we walked around the cemetery. I decided to audio record us just hanging out. Nothing really happened as we were inside besides seeing shadows, but when I got home and checked the audio, I had caught multiple EVPs. In one of them, you can hear someone saying something about touching or having my blood. I decided it's probably for the best I don't return, even though I'm still curious and think about returning. If anyone wants to hear the EVPs, I can send them over to you. Recent experience at my local cemetery. I live near one of the oldest cemeteries in Portland, Oregon. Pioneer era, the oldest graves are from the 1850s, and it's still active today, with funerals all the time. Anyway, I go walk and jog through there pretty often. I'll usually jog a couple of miles and then finish up with some wind sprints. There's a spot where it's straight for around 60 or 70 yards, so I'll do 8 or 10 of those and then quit. The spot I usually start running from is right near the grave of a young boy who was born in 1896 and died in 1902. I've done some research, and all his family is actually buried in a different cemetery, so I always feel somewhat sad about it. His name is Carl, and it's weird maybe, but I talk to the kid's grave as I'm resting up between sprints. For whatever reason, that's the only grave in there that I've ever paid much attention to and about the only one I've done any research on. Not sure why exactly. A couple of weeks ago on Wednesday, I was doing my thing. Stopped at my normal spot, said hi to Carl, and instantly got this sickening feeling I was in danger. I looked up at this tree, a big old oak, with branches around 1.5 feet in diameter. I was absolutely terrified. I started running and got the hell out of the way. I was absolutely 100% sure this branch was going to fall and kill me. I waited a few minutes and came back over and started looking at this oak tree and the horse chestnut right beside it. I couldn't decide which tree actually was going to fall, so I blew it off as paranoia. It didn't seem like a credible premonition or anything similar. The next day, Thursday, I go for a run, avoiding that area. When I finished up, I went back and stopped next to Carl's grave. It's a little later than I usually go, mid-afternoon, and it's getting pretty hot out, so I really wasn't looking forward to running more. I didn't actually hear anything, but something told me, you shouldn't go any further. So, it's hot, I'm tired, and I'm paranoid. I noped out and went home. The next day, Friday, I go back into the cemetery. A massive branch from the oak tree had fallen and knocked about 5 branches off the horse chestnut. It all landed on Carl's grave and right on the part of the path I usually jog on. Some park workers were already cutting the trees up to clear the path. I asked one of the park workers, and he told me that the tree had fallen sometime Thursday afternoon. I have no idea if I actually would have been there at that time at that spot, but it was weird enough to freak me out a little bit. So, anyway, thanks, Carl. I saw a spirit clearly. I have always been sensitive to the spiritual world since I was very young. I am in my 60s, and I have had experiences with the spiritual on average, once or twice a year my entire life. I have been touched, seen things move, and seen actual apparitions. I always can perceive evil quite accurately in both the living and the spiritual realms. I worked in public safety for over 30 years. I have stayed married to my first wife for 37 years. My kids and grandkids love me, and I still have my old school friends. I am a very solid, normal grandpa type guy. Also, I have always been able to perceive the spiritual aspect. I find it virtually impossible to discuss this subject with most people because it is a topic that makes some uncomfortable, some slightly angry and dismissive, and some glad to share their experiences with a like-minded friend. This is my recent experience. Recently, out of the blue, I had an urge to look up the location of an old satanic ritual site. When I was in high school, a large group of students became goths. This group included kids with Wicca and some with dark magic spells. These kids would do what I considered satanic spells in a cave in a state forest. The cave was accessible by a now abandoned road. I, and many other kids in my high school, would go drink beer and watch the witchy show. We would ridicule the silly nonsense as we chugged our beer. But still I was aware and afraid of the power of the spells. The magic kids had drawn inverted pentagrams, would chant, and deliver spells to small fires they had set in the cave. They had books to recite actual spells. None of these kids turned out well. The spot became more and more popular with high schoolers, with many drunken parties. After a series of criminal events, the county dynamited the cave entrance, and the high schoolers quit coming after that. However, even 40 years later, people continue to visit the site to cast spells. So I looked up the location on the computer, and I decided to take my motorcycle to the location of the old cave. The road to the cave was abandoned and quite broken up. A motorcycle or quad was the only way to get there now. I arrived at the spot and had to hike up a steep bluff to the old cave. The cave remained sealed and had not been reopened. But around the collapsed entrance were remnants of spells. An orange candle and a burned child's toy suspended with fishing line over a dead fire. Pentagrams were painted on the rocks and on a flat rock near the ashes of the fire. I looked around for a while, reminiscing about my previous visits many years before. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye and looked up the bluff. Floating through the trees was a wisp of smoke. The smoke floated towards me. The smoke did not change shape or orientation. It remained constant as it floated through the trees towards me. I expected the smoke to drift off course and not come directly at me because it was over 100 feet away when I first saw it. The smoke homed in on me, and it did not deviate. The static smoke slowed considerably as it reached me. It floated over the tops of my shoes, floated slowly up my body, came right before my eyes, and then just disappeared. I immediately said a prayer of protection. I asked myself, why in the hell did you look this place up, and, why are you here? A day later in my paper a story appeared about a suicide that occurred in the area I had gone to. It was likely there, nearby, during my visit. I do not believe I met the spirit of the deceased, I think I met the spirit of what influenced the man to kill himself. It likes to remind me it has not forgotten me. This event happened as told. I've experienced ghosts/spirits several times during my lifetime. Several I remember the most. While staying with my maternal grandmother in the mountains of New Mexico, we were set to go home the next day, and it was early in the morning. Grandma was cooking in the kitchen, which woke me up. As I was looking at the door, which was open at the time, I saw a face in it. As a young kid, I wiped my eyes and looked again. Yep, it was still there, turning its head, looking into the kitchen, and then turning to look into the bedroom. I remember peeking out from under the covers to see if the head was still there. Eventually my grandmother came in to wake me up for the trip home. I never mentioned it to anyone. The other memorable one was when I was in the Navy stationed at Corpus Christi, Texas. A buddy of mine had a part-time job cleaning out old buildings and warehouses at the time. He asked me if I wanted some extra cash cleaning out the city's old general hospital. I said sure, and we drove into town to start the job. I was assigned to the operating room to catalog the instruments and equipment. I was sorting surgical instruments when I felt someone standing by my side and turned to see a fully formed man wearing a hospital gown and talking to me, but I couldn't hear anything of what he was saying. I slowly walked out of the room with the ghost still talking and went to my friend and said I needed help in the OR. Of course, the man never showed up again. Old lady in the cemetery. My mom and dad experienced this a couple days ago and told me about it since they know I'm into the paranormal. They like to walk at our local cemetery before sunset for exercise. The whole cemetery is on one big hill, slope with only a couple big 100-year-old trees. They were driving toward the top of the slope and passed an old lady. My mom said she looked so out of place, she was so old, moving/limping so slowly, and dressed in a nude nightgown with it falling to the side and her bra exposed. My dad also commented that maybe she needed help. So they stopped the car and got out only to find the woman gone. There was nowhere for her to go or hide, especially at the rate she was moving. They walked around hoping to see her but never did. My mom said she felt an eerie sensation the entire time, and they left shortly after driving around to check for her in case she had fallen, but she was already gone. Paranormal encounter. I don't know if I should believe this story or not, but my uncle told me this once. It happened to his grandfather when he was young a long time ago. His grandfather was driving a truck at night, and at the side of the road, a young woman stuck out her hand for a ride. He stopped and took her in. She asked him if he could bring her home, and he agreed to it. The drive to her home was around half an hour, and they talked a bit during the drive. He then dropped her off at her home, she thanked him and walked towards her home, and he went off. Later that night he noticed that she forgot her coat on the passenger seat, so he decided to bring it back the next day because it was late by then. The next day he went back to her home, another woman opened the door. It was the mother of that young woman, and he said how he gave her a ride yesterday but that she forgot her coat in his truck. The woman looked sad and started sobbing. He asked her what's wrong, and then she asked him if he could come with her. They went together a few yards away and went into a cemetery. They walked towards a gravestone, and on that stone was the picture of the woman he gave a ride to the night before. He was shocked when he saw it. The woman said how her daughter died years ago and was buried there. The man couldn't believe it. He seemed to have encountered a ghost, but she didn't look nor sound like a ghost. He gave the mother her coat, and she put it over her gravestone. After that, he went home and couldn't sleep the whole night. He couldn't believe what just happened to him. I'm a bit skeptical and don't know if I should believe the story, but my uncle insists that it happened to his grandfather and that he talked about it until his death. It haunted him forever. My friends and I went to an abandoned house. I and my friend saw an abandoned house pop up a few weeks ago, and after countless times asking to go, they finally agreed. After coming back from 7 to 11, we were talking about what to say to the cops if they found us. We agreed on saying that my friend got mad and threw the tennis ball and went to go retrieve it. As we arrived at the house, we got over a fence and started in the backyard looking for an entrance. All the windows were boarded up, so we went to the shed in the backyard. Inside the shed, we found many creepy items that were not typical of what you would expect to see in a shed, such as tools. We found a bunch of Halloween decorations and a Ouija board. We said, "Duck that," and closed the door behind us. A couple of seconds later the door flew open, there wasn't even a slight breeze out. And there was a state of a family that made me dizzy just standing near it. I passed out, and when I woke back up, while we were looking for an entrance, we found a tennis ball with the number 7 on it. We heard police sirens and decided to leave. While returning to our bikes, which we had locked at the 7 to 11, we researched the spiritual meaning of the number 7. I don't really remember the details, but it indicated that a spirit is inviting you to take risks for potential rewards. If someone can tell me what I looked up to get that result, that would be nice because I can't find it anymore. Abandoned school ghosts? This story happened in my hometown when I think I was about 8 to 9 years old. My hometown is very small, though there are multiple neighborhoods and the occasional abandoned house left to rot. At that time, I didn't know much of the town history, but I knew of an old building that was called the Old Town Name School by my classmates and teachers. Anyway, one day I was walking to school, and since the abandoned building is on my way, I took a glance at it. In one of the windows of the house, I saw a pure white curtain flapping around because of the wind. Behind the curtain were 3 elderly women. They seemed to be having a conversation before looking down from the window at me, making eye contact. I still have a vivid memory of the look on one of the women's faces, a face of confusion. I quickly broke eye contact and continued walking to school. I don't remember what happened that day except for that strange experience. I don't know what I saw that day, if it really happened, and if I was supposed to see it. For all I know, it could be a dream. The only people I have told about this experience were my mom and my friend. My mom said that I saw ghosts, like a past student of the school, but other than that she laughed it off. On the other hand, my friend found the story unsettling and informed me that I likely saw ghosts. For extra information, there is no reason for people to be entering the building, and there is no accessible entrance, that I know of. The area around the building is all covered in weeds, vines, and bushes. All windows and doors are boarded up with wood, and nobody investigates the building's area. I'm not sure if I really did see ghosts or if it was a dream. Thank you for listening. GPS randomly took me to a 1700s graveyard. 2 years ago 2 friends and I decided to go on a late-night adventure and drive to a bigger city about an hour away from our hometown. We got to the city around 11 p.m. and were just exploring random areas. I had my iPhone connected to the vehicle's audio system for music playback when, unexpectedly, the music ceased, and the display switched to maps. We entered a destination on the map, and a male AI voice started directing us. We decided to follow it like it wasn't something straight out of a horror movie. The first destination it took us to was a worn-out road at the back of a construction zone. The road went up into a forest that was surrounded by large fences. There were trespassing signs everywhere, so we decided to turn around. The GPS then rerouted us to another point about 20 minutes away from the first one. We drove to the second point, and it was a dead-end road on the opposite side of the forest from the first road. We were pretty freaked out by the experience, and I reconnected my phone and went back home. Fast forward to a few days ago, and one of the friends who I had gone with was talking to me on the phone. He brought up the experience, and we decided to look into it. We found the 2 roads on Google Earth and could see a house in the forest with a clearing behind it. We started doing some research on the house and came across a court document connected to the address. Developers had bought the land and were denied approval to build on the land where the house stood. I didn't think much of this until I read further and saw why they were denied. The clearing we saw on Google Earth ended up being a cemetery where the original settlers of the city were buried. With more research, we came to the conclusion that a man who had owned the land sometime before the 1990s had moved every headstone, leaving the graves unmarked. It took historians years to discover the cemetery, and they were granted permission to make a thorough report on it. They found 99 grave shafts, but 60 of them were much smaller, meaning they belonged to children. The developers had unveiled in court that they would simply move the remains into a corner of the new subdivision without any ceremony. The other road we were taken to was located on the opposite side of the forest, as if it were directing us to drive through from that side instead of taking the main road. The strangest aspect of this entire experience was realizing that the court date occurred exactly 10 years prior to the day we conducted our research. We found it odd that it took us so long to investigate what the GPS was directing us to, especially since it occurred on the 10-year anniversary of this unusual case. I honestly believe that our GPS was being manipulated by a spirit that belonged to the graveyard, and they wanted us to know what had happened there. The man from the burnt house. I was about 6/7 years old. We were on the school bus going home. We stopped to drop off my best friend. As the assistant was undoing the safety clamps on my friend's wheelchair to get her off the bus, there was a loud commotion from the house next door. It's worth me mentioning that we all knew the area well, and we all believed, from my friend living next door, that the house had been abandoned for many years. It was creepy, burnt out, and grimy on the outside. The garden was so overgrown with weeds and tall grass you could not see the path, and the gate was almost off its hinges. The commotion came from a very dirty, unkempt, deranged-sounding man who suddenly just appeared out of nowhere and started to run at the open-ended bus. He had something shiny in his hand, and he was ranting insanely. The back was down as the assistant and driver were just about to put my friend on the lift in her wheelchair to take her to her front door. The man tried to get on the back of the bus via the lift, but obviously, as the bus was full of young disabled children, the driver and assistant weren't letting that happen. They quickly raised the lift and shut the doors. The man, frustrated by this, went round the sides of the bus and banged loudly on the windows, scaring us very badly. We had to stay locked in the bus until someone, probably a neighbor, called the police. Now the really creepy thing was, by the time the police arrived, there was no sign of the man at all. It was like he disappeared as fast as he appeared. The police looked for him in and around the house, but they didn't see anything of him. They spoke to the driver and assistant for some time and waited for my friend to be taken to her front door and until we drove away. We never did find out who the man was, but I can still remember the incident like it was yesterday. A warning from the grave. I wanted to share something that's been on my mind for a while now. I never told this story to anyone, out of fear of seeming like I'm crazy or just making a story up for attention or something. I've finally come to terms with what I experienced that day, and with it being Halloween, it just seems like the appropriate time to share this with you guys. When I was 13 years old, my mother wanted to pay respects to our grandmother, who passed some time ago, especially with Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, around the corner. She wanted to leave my grandmother a small token of affection to let her know she's still in our thoughts. So my mom, my younger sister, and I went on a trip to the cemetery where she was buried. The drive there was always the hardest part since the cemetery is really out of town, and it takes almost 2 hours or so just to get there. Keep in mind this was the pre-smartphone era. When we finally got there, I remembered we had to park far off into the distance since the entrance didn't have paved roads for cars and the terrain itself was very dense and wooded with mesquite trees and weeds, with the exception of a small, semi-cleared area where a large, old oak tree stood. The name of the cemetery was Rio Grande City Cemetery, in Texas. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in town, and it's been around since 1848. We made it inside the compound where my grandmother was buried, and we all got together and said a small prayer and laid some of my grandmother's favorite items on the gravestone, and she continued to pray, while my sister and I started to explore the cemetery and the various types of towering gravestones and weathered statues that riddled the area. We then started to pick up a faint smell in the air. It wasn't overbearing, but it was noticeable. It had a musty, rancid quality to it. Thinking nothing of it, my sister and I continued exploring the surrounding area. It was at this point my boredom got the best of me, and I snatched my sister's Barbie doll she brought with her for the trip, and I started to antagonize her into chasing me. Yeah, I know, I was an idiot back then. Lucky for me, she was never a fast runner, and I easily ran almost halfway through the vast cemetery. While trying to look back to see if my sister was still chasing me, I tripped on one of the older gravestones and fell face first on top of a really old grave site. Just as I was getting up from my fall, I felt the ground beneath my feet start to shake, and this freaked me out. So I grabbed my sister's Barbie doll and sprinted back to where the entrance was. Out of breath and shaken, I met up with my sister, who was already by the car, angrily waiting for my return. It was at this point that the faint, rancid smell from earlier began to grow. It was suffocating, and it was odorous enough to reach all the way to where we were parked. Our mother, who was already making her way back to the car, even acknowledged the foul odor. It was nauseating enough to make her gag. I then started hearing what I can only describe as a scratching noise coming from the tall oak tree. It's almost as if something was clawing at the base of the oak tree. My sister heard it too, and that was enough for her to get in the car and push us to do the same. As we all got in the car and began to drive off, I noticed someone coming out from the back of the oak tree. It was a thin, pale woman in a red dress. She looked bruised and disheveled. The odd thing that stood out to me most was the look on her face. She had a malevolent grin from ear to ear on her face. It was the most unnatural, unsettling smile I've ever seen on a person. My sister, petrified, also saw the woman in the red dress, and as soon as she came closer out on the road, my sister started shouting at the top of her lungs, "Why is her leg twisted like that? Make her go away." It was at this point I noticed that one of her legs was twisted in an unnatural fashion. It was almost bent all the way backwards. She then stretched out her arm as we were leaving. While doing this, she was saying something in a language I didn't understand, but we were already too far off to catch anything she was saying at this point, and to be honest, I don't think I'd want to know. I haven't set foot in that graveyard since this happened, and I don't know if what I saw that day was real or not, or if I just imagined the whole thing. I don't even know if my sister remembers the whole ordeal, and to be honest, I can never muster up the courage to ask her, but I did ask my mother if she remembers anything from that day, and she said she does remember the rancid smell. When I was in junior high, my friends and I did farm work on Saturdays in exchange for free horseback riding lessons, technically legal child labor. On the way to the farm there was this abandoned yellow farmhouse with several outbuildings and a family graveyard, and I was obsessed with it. My mom and I would stop, go inside, and talk about how we'd fix it up if it were ours. We were dirt poor, so it was a fantasy for us to have our own house. For years, I walked around the house and the property at least once a week for 20 minutes to an hour. I spent time in both barns and the graveyard. One grave in particular drew me right in. Her name was Naomi Mansfield, and I was so incredibly connected to that stone. For the years I visited, the house stayed the same. Lots of creaking boards and dust, but Butte could go up the stairs and walk around with no issues at all. The foundation was solid, there was no significant water damage, the front porch was rotting a bit, but that was it. When I was around 15 or 16, I went to visit, and someone had knocked down Naomi's gravestone, writing down. It split in half, and there was this small sliver of stone at the break, and I brought it home and kept it in a pouch around my neck. I always had really bad vibes in one of the barns, feelings of violence, and I just knew she had been hurt in that barn. After knocking down the gravestone, the barn caught fire the next time we visited. I quit the farm soon after, and we didn't go to the house for a few months. In that span, the house essentially deteriorated. Where we had been walking around inside, going upstairs without any problems, it suddenly started sagging and falling. The house remained in the same condition for years, but after a few months, it began to actively decay. We stopped going inside when it was clearly no longer safe, but we'd still walk the property, and the energy shift was tangible. It almost felt like the house had lured us in, and as long as we were emotionally invested in it, we saw exactly what we wanted. The less we invested, the more it crumbled. After a while we stopped walking the grounds, and it aged 20 to 30 years in a matter of a few more months. I'd sometimes pull over and just look at it from the road, watching it sag and darken. Eventually I went to college and lived my life. It was eventually torn down, and the land is now part of a high-end housing development. I don't know what they did with the graveyard. I still think about it a lot. It really felt like an old abandoned house had enchanted me completely. Strange encounter at a cemetery, dog, growling, and a woman's voice. I had a pretty unsettling experience tonight at a cemetery, and I'm curious if anyone else has encountered anything like this. I visited my friend's grave around 9:45 to 10 p.m. He was recently buried on Monday, and I've been visiting him every day since. I was by myself last night, Christmas Eve, with no issues, no strange feelings or sounds. Everything felt normal. The tent from his burial was still set up, so I parked my car at the end of the cemetery, which is a place you can drive through, and did the same tonight, Christmas. I brought a friend along tonight, and we sat under the tent for a bit. I lit the same tea light I left last night. Nothing strange had happened, and we were just sitting there talking until around 10:05 when I said goodbye. We started walking back to my car. That's when things got weird. As we were walking, we heard growling and barking coming from the middle of the cemetery. We weren't sure what it was, but we kept walking towards my car. Then, we saw a large white dog, about the size of a large shepherd, but with patches or spots. It didn't approach us, but it was pacing back and forth. The weird part was that it didn't seem like a normal dog. My friend heard it growling the whole time we were walking back. At this point, we turned off our flashlights and started walking slowly, with my friend keeping his eyes on the dog while I kept my gaze on my car. The dog didn't move toward us or seem aggressive, but after a while, it just disappeared. The cemetery is pretty open, and we were both watching it, so we don't know how it just vanished. Once we were in the car and I locked the doors, things took another strange turn. As I was backing out, we both heard a woman's voice. She screamed, "Help!" It sounded like it came from near the cemetery. We quickly left and got to my friend's house, where we noticed something even stranger. There were long, dragged finger marks on my car's trunk and two very distinct, fresh fingerprints on the passenger door. They weren't there when I first got in the car. We didn't stop to take pictures at the time, but it was pretty clear something had left those marks. I don't know if it's related to the cemetery experience or something else, but it's all been really unsettling. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this, especially the growling dog or the woman's voice? I'm trying to make sense of it, but I'm not sure what to think. Thanks in advance for any insight. This experience was bizarre and scary, and it has nothing to do with the paranormal. Some background: when I was in middle school, life was chaotic. My family, neighbors, landlord and others in the area were nuts, and I mean nuts. Drugs, violence, exploitation, etc. School was tough too, but I found solace in after-school clubs. There weren't a lot available at the time, so I ended up in a geography club. It was honestly a lot of fun. During this time, we were experiencing ongoing issues with some neighbors who had attempted to harm my mother, a 50-year-old disabled single parent, on several occasions over what seemed like petty things. This was compounded by my unpleasant grandmother coming around my home. On to the story. My geography club decided to take a trip to our local cemetery to do grave etchings and learn about all the different places people had come from to end up in our town. Cool trip. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned a lot. It was all fun until it was time for pickup. As usual, my mom was running super late. This time because of my grandmother. It got so late that only myself and the kid of the violent neighbors were left. He wasn't part of the club, keep that in mind. It got so late that the teacher who led the trip, unable to reach my mom, called the neighbors' parents to take me home with their son, who was tired of waiting. I wasn't aware he had asked this, or I would have informed him otherwise. Not long after, the teacher left us at the cemetery in the middle of town. He left us at the cemetery in the middle of town unattended. Though this wasn't unusual. I've been abandoned by teachers many times. The neighbors show up 20 minutes later and start trying to get me in their car, but I refuse. I knew my mom would not be okay with this, and I didn't trust them one bit not to try to hurt me. So I ran into the cemetery. Thankfully, I knew the layout better than them and made my way to a mausoleum that I knew was generally unlocked. Luckily, it was. I hid in the mausoleum for over 30 minutes, listening to them call out my name, initially in a kind manner, but soon with many nasty slurs directed at me. I didn't budge. After probably close to 40 minutes had gone by since I'd last heard them or their car, I came out. Another hour passes and my mom and grandmother finally show up, as the sun is almost entirely down. Later I gave my mom the rundown. She was furious and reported it to the school and cops, but nothing really happened. Strange paranormal encounter at the cemetery. A few weeks ago I was visiting a friend at the cemetery with my GF and another friend. It was an emotionally charged evening, and I was sitting in my car for a while talking with my GF after my other friend left. It was about 8 p.m. when, mid-conversation with my GF, I noticed some American flags on a few graves near where my car was parked. 2 along the sides of the headstones were stationary, barely moving, but one in the middle of the headstone was violently flapping in the wind. I didn't think much of it until I watched it for a moment and it stopped, then it started back up again a few moments later. Then I looked at the other flags near it that weren't moving and thought to myself, why is the one that is blocked by the wind moving more than the ones unobstructed? Following that thought, my next thought was, oh shit, a ghost, and I dipped out of the cemetery. I'm hoping next time I visit my friend I can get a picture. Creepy cemetery story. This story takes place in 2010. When I was in high school, I worked at the movie theater in town. It was an awesome first job. Free popcorn, soda, and candy, and I got to watch movies whenever I wanted. The owners would even let me bring friends in after hours to watch movies or play games on the big screen. It was pretty normal for my friends to drive around town and randomly stop by the theater when they knew I was working. Not much else to do in a small town. 2 of my friends, Taylor, nicknamed Teague, and Justin, stopped by and hung out in the lobby with me while we waited for the movie to end. Teague told me he had heard a rumor of some weird lights out at an old cemetery just outside of town. Teague was a pathological liar, so I doubted almost everything that came out of his mouth. Justin started backing up what Teague was saying, so I told them that as soon as I finished cleaning up the theater, I'd close up and drive out to this cemetery with them. The late show finished, I cleaned the theater, and I locked up around 1 a.m. I honestly had no idea what to expect, so I told them I'd drive. At the time, I drove my dad's F-150 Ford pickup truck, so the 3 of us squeezed into the front seat, and they directed me out to this cemetery. I thought for sure they were messing with me, but after about 20 minutes of driving on old country roads, we came up to a bridge, which was at the bottom of a hill. The bridge was surrounded by woods, and the cemetery was at the top of the hill. The bridge looked super old, and I wasn't sure if it would hold the weight of the truck, so I parked the truck right in front of the bridge. Teague told me to turn the truck off and said he was getting out. At this point, I didn't really trust Teague, and I was also freaked out because we were at a cemetery around 2 a.m., so I told them I was staying in the truck. They caved and stayed in the truck with me. About 5 or so minutes passed, and we started to see fireflies. It was so dark and clear out that we could even see them in the woods around us. I asked Teague if those were the lights he saw, but before he could answer, he pointed up at the top of the hill, and I saw a giant blue light. Once I looked at this blue light at the top of the hill, several others popped up in the woods around us, and then more up in the actual cemetery. The lights looked like they were blinking, but this could have also been from moving around in the woods where trees were blocking their light. I started freaking out and was screaming at both of them and told them that if they were playing a prank on me, it wasn't funny and that I was leaving. I tried starting the truck, but it turned once and then died. Teague had a shocked look on his face, which only made me more anxious. At this point, I was crying, borderline hysterical, and kept pumping the gas when turning the key. I didn't look up. I didn't want to. Finally, after what felt like forever, the truck started. I looked up and saw that the blue light at the top of the hill was now in the middle of the bridge and had taken the shape of a torso. At this point, I had no ducking clue what was happening, but I just had a really bad feeling and knew I needed to get out of there. Teague was yelling at me to stay there, that he wanted this thing to get closer, but I wasn't listening. I was shaking as I threw the truck into reverse and sped back the way we came. We were quiet the whole way back to the theater. I dropped Teague and Justin off at their car and drove home. I sat up in bed on the computer searching to see if I could find any explanation for what I saw. Angels? Demons? Spirit orbs? Aliens? No idea. It all seemed like bullshit to me, but I still couldn't logically explain what I saw. The following morning, I went to Brittany's house. Brittany was my best friend at the time, and I knew she'd believe me. As soon as I told her about the story, she asked me to drive her to the cemetery, so I did. We parked in front of the bridge, walked up the hill, and then around the cemetery. We looked for LED lights on tombstones, flashlights, and even footprints around in the muddy woods, but we didn't see anything that could explain what I saw the night before. The cemetery was also too far away from any major road for it to have been car headlights. I still don't know what we saw that night, and I get goosebumps every time I think about it. If anything, it's helped me keep an open mind about the weird stuff that happens. The ranch. I've had several spooky occurrences in my life, but this event sticks out in my memory. It was the most traumatizing. I was about 11 years old, and a few of my family members had rented out a ranch. My aunt and her father moved into this old house with several acres of land surrounding it. The property had been a junkyard years ago, and the broken down cars took up nearly half the area. The remaining area consisted of steep hills that were filled with snakes. The rent was extremely cheap for such a large property, but seeing as the landlord was in jail for an unknown reason, my grandfather didn't question it. The man needed money for bail. Now I was excited to be at my aunt's and grandfather's new place. It had so much room to play and explore. And I loved the property but hated going inside the house. It just had this awful, dirty vibe to it. As a naive child, I easily ignored it. My family has always been the type to throw barbecues and bonfires, which we could do in such a big place. But parties always included my parents' beloved Jack Daniels, which led to drunken adults incapable of driving. We were forced to spend the night there much more than I would have liked. My family threw a 4th of July party that year at the ranch, but after all the beer was gone and the bottle rockets lit, we all crashed out in the living room. I should probably mention that I absolutely hated the living room. As bad as the cramped basement was or as gross as the singular bathroom smelled, the living room was the worst. I, as the oldest of the children, had to give the couch to my siblings, but given that I was still a kid and had to respect my elders, which meant no sleeping on the futon, I had to sleep on the disgusting carpet. I had woken up at some point during the night, or rather early in the morning, and decided I was thirsty. Reluctantly, I got up to find my cup of water. My eyesight has always been very bad, so I needed glasses. I, for obvious reasons, took them off in my sleep. I still hadn't put my glasses on as I searched for my cup. My hand knocked over the cup, spilling water everywhere. I grumpily sat up and grabbed my glasses. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something enter the room from the kitchen, so I glanced up. Through my grainy, sleep-blurred vision, I made out one of my uncles. I told him that I had spilled my water and asked if he knew where the towels were. There was no response. So, I repeated it as I put on my glasses, thinking that he didn't hear me. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I froze. A man I didn't recognize stood in the doorway, staring at me. I couldn't make a sound as he gazed at me with a cold expression. It wasn't until he jolted forward that I screamed. Most of the adults in the room reacted to my shriek, but the man was gone. My parents calmed me down, but no one seemed to believe me when I described what had happened. However, the next morning, once all the blankets and pillows had been put away, a large dark stain appeared right below where I was sleeping. My grandfather blamed me, saying that I had spilled something and hadn't bothered to clean it up, and he made me scrub the carpet. Of course, the stain wouldn't come out. Eventually it was left alone. A few months ago, I was talking to my aunt about her new house, and the ranch came up. As it turns out, the landlord had gotten drunk and ended his son. He died in the middle of the living room. I don't know if what happened that night is related to the murder, and frankly, I don't want to know. Living next to a graveyard. 5 to 6 years ago, I lived right next to a graveyard in Jakarta, Indonesia. For context, the house I lived in was by the Muslim section of the graveyard. All windows facing the graveyard were either completely absent or reduced to practically a slit you couldn't peer through unless you stood on a stool or ladder. I wouldn't consider myself superstitious, especially not like some of the locals and some family members, but strange unexplained things have definitely occurred. My bed was against one of the walls facing the graveyard, so there was a slit-like window I decided to look through. I could see not only a graveyard but also a young dead bird stuck to the window. I remember asking for it to be removed by the landlords, and they did, except the bird's head was stuck to the window. It stayed there for years. In the middle of the night I would often hear drumming and singing in the graveyard. It usually sounded like it was a man just singing on his own while banging on a drum or tambourine. Undeniably, there has definitely been a person or several people just hanging about at such hours. When I lived there, essentially sleeping next to a graveyard, I also struggled with anxiety and depression like I never had before. I experienced auditory and visual hallucinations, hearing or seeing the shadow of a male, night terrors, and nightmares like I never have before. A few shitty things have happened that could have triggered this, though, and thankfully I get that I am able to cope much better with my anxiety. Paranormal encounter. Growing up I had always had experiences with the paranormal. Probably had something to do with the town I lived in. Back in 1889, over 2,209 died a horrific death. Then, in 1977, another 84 people died in the same manner as those who had died in 1889. My first encounter that I can remember with the paranormal was when I was around 8 years old. My mother was going upstairs and told me to follow her. I watched her go up the stairs, then I got up to follow. She was in her room with the door shut, and I asked if I could come in. She said, "Just wait, I'll be out in a minute," so I stood outside her door for what seemed like forever just waiting. 20 or so minutes went by, and I opened the door to find no one there. I ran back downstairs, and there was my mother. Frantic and upset, I asked her why she had me go upstairs and wait outside her door and how she got downstairs without me seeing her. She told me that she had been downstairs the whole time and hadn't been upstairs for hours. So who told me to follow them upstairs? Who answered my question when I asked if I could go into the room? In my 10th grade year I met a guy named John, and we became great friends. We shared one teacher, Mrs. McCloskey, and all three of us were really close. I start this story here because these names are important. Nearly every weekend in the summer, my family and I walked about a mile to our favorite hiking spot. On our way there we would always pass this very large deserted cemetery. The cemetery was 100 plus years old. There was one opening in the front, and it was fenced the rest of the way around. I always stared at the cemetery while we walked by, feeling sorry for the condition of the headstones and the dead that now lie with no family to visit them. One day while my family and I were taking our normal walk to the hiking trail, I again couldn't keep my eyes off of the cemetery. This day was different because I saw two people standing up at the far side looking at a very tall, large, square headstone. The two of them were wearing 1900s clothing. The guy in a nice brown dress coat with dark brown leather on his elbows and a brown bowler hat. The lady in an ankle-length red dress with white polka dots had beautiful curly brown hair. I mentioned to my family, "Hey, there are people up in the cemetery." My family immediately turned to look, only to find that the people had simply vanished. I couldn't understand where they could have gone. Remember, the cemetery was fenced all the way around but on the side where my family and I were. About 2 weeks later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I walked up to the same headstone that I had seen these people at. On the gravestones were written 3 names, John, McCloskey, and my name. I was scared shitless, and I never went back to that cemetery, and my family and I moved the next year. It's been 14 years since we moved, and I haven't had a paranormal experience since. My experience with ghosts. Let's start with some backstory first. Before the house we lived in was built, around 30 years ago, there was only one room abandoned for 30 years. Later they expanded and built the third and last floor, which we lived on, and that room was part of it, although it was rebuilt. Let's start. That room always felt unsettling and gave me strange feelings. Weird feelings that night felt like a regular day. I was 12 years old. My family decided to go to the mall, and since I was asleep in that room, they decided not to wake me up. I slept in that room because my room at the time was getting renovated. Then some time later I wake up hearing sounds in the living room, a bunch of people talking. I said loudly, "Did you bring me anything?" Suddenly the house returned to silence. I got scared and went to check the living room. Nobody's there, I said to myself. I must have been imagining things. I went back to sleep hoping it was just me. A few minutes later I wake up feeling like I was being watched. I look at the room door. I see this tall black shadow was standing there peeking into the room. I got scared and stared at it for a while. I blinked, and then it suddenly disappeared. Feeling scared, I hid under my pillow until I slept again. A few minutes go by. I feel this cold touch. I wake up and see a tall black shadow right in front of me. In front of me, I closed my eyes and hid under my pillow, then ran into a different room. Closed the door until my family came back. A few months later, I encountered a ritual in my religion, not Christianity, that purges ghosts. After doing it, I heard a loud, deep sound saying, "I'm stronger. I'm stronger. I'm stronger." A strong knock on the door, then there was a soft sound saying, "You'll leave. In the name of God, you'll leave." This figure then sounds like it is responding but is a bit far. The figure says, "I'll never leave, I won't abandon him because I am the strongest." The ghost of a girl in a cemetery. My sister died young. She was 13 and I was 16. I would often go to her grave, almost always after school. Those were the worst first months without her. That day, a little later, I went to the cemetery, and the darkness just didn't fall. I stand in front of her grave, praying and talking to my sister at the same time. Suddenly a little girl ran past me. I turn around, look at her, and immediately notice how strangely dressed she is. She has an old white dress the way children used to have, probably in the 1900s and even earlier. And such a hairstyle and shoes. She looked at me and laughed. I smile back and wave at her. She just looks at me and then disappears. She vanished in an instant, even quicker than that. I literally opened my mouth in shock. I was shocked and scared, so I don't know what words to describe it. I looked around, out of fear. I was just heading for the exit when my eyes accidentally stuck to one small, elegant children's grave, an old one, which I passed every time but didn't pay any attention to. Now I look at the picture on that grave, and I see that the girl in the picture has the same hair, face, and dress as my daughter. I almost died of shock. Then I started walking so fast that I almost fell. For several days, weeks, I did not go to the cemetery. From then until today, I have felt discomfort and fear of passing by that grave. Steppe Cemetery. Steppe Cemetery is located in the middle of a large forest. You need to take winding roads with no lights to get there, and it's only marked by a short wall with a crude cross spray painted on it. After you park in the gravel side area, you walk up an inclined path with dense woods on either side until you reach a clearing in the woods littered with old 1800s gravestones. It's here that a mother had to have her child buried, and beside it, a tree was cut down so that she could watch over her child's grave, though after her death, reports of seeing a woman sitting on the stump and holding her baby in her arms started to come about. As well as legends that seeing her or sitting on the stump would curse you to die within the year. When I went out to Steppe Cemetery the first time, I didn't see a definite stump near a grave, though there were some old trees cut down. They didn't overlook any child's grave. There was, however, a worn-down wicker rocking chair in the corner of the graveyard and a terribly made inset stone with two words inside a heart shape that was drawn when the cement was still wet, Baby Lester. Not sure if either of these were authentic to the story. A friend of mine moved the chair a little from where it was and turned it to a different side. It didn't take the full 45-minute drive back home for us to regret what we did, and we started making plans to go back that night and fix our mistake. When the three of us got to the center of the graveyard, the full moon was directly overhead. The trees were still. The air did not move. It was too thick for any of us to even speak. We could not take a step, stuck in a tight line a dozen feet from the chair we intended to put back. While my one friend was staring frozen at the chair in front of us, I and my other friend were busy turning our heads to keep our eyes on the trees that surrounded us on all sides. We were all equally too terrified to even speak or take a photograph. We all agreed we needed to turn around and get back to the car. Leaving Steppe Cemetery is probably more terrifying than being there. Going down that long path back to the road, the same thought is on everyone's mind every time. If I run, it will just chase me. And so you have to walk at a steady pace, downhill, Until you are safe in your car and driving away. It wasn't until we were well on the road before anyone had the nerve to say, "What the hell just happened?" It was then that my friend, the one who had moved the chair, told us that he couldn't do it. He couldn't move the chair because someone was sitting in it. Despite the chair sitting sideways from us, my friend reported seeing a woman in a long veil that covered a faceless void. And she was facing him. We did return another day to fix the chair, but the sun was well up at the time. We would return to Step a few more times. We visited plenty of graveyards back then, but if you wanted to really come away with an experience, you went to Step, and we told others who insisted on seeing it themselves. One of these times happened on Halloween, and before I had a handle on things, over a dozen people were caravanning down to the graveyard. One of these people was a former bartender at the restaurant I worked at during that time. He was adamant and recklessly cheerful about sitting on every possible chair and stump he found that night. Which is exactly what he did. I even have one photo of him sitting on an old stump with a grin and his hands out like he was saying, "Here I am. Bring it on." I would ask about him now and then with the other people who knew him. He used to come in and visit a lot at the bar he used to tend. He was pretty much a nightly regular. But after that night, no one attested to seeing him again. My friends and I went urban exploring in an abandoned assisted living facility at night. I took 4 flashlights because I know the ghosts mess with your flashlights, and I wasn't going to be stuck in the dark crying like a child. We walked around the building and found a window that could be opened. We entered the place through that window into the awaiting blackness. The facility had been closed for quite some time with no power or water. I do have to admit I didn't take an absolute account of which room we came in from, which we will get back to later. When the building was abandoned, they left everything. One of the patients' rooms had a dresser with personal things like a watch, wallet, and some jewelry. It sat in the quiet darkness waiting to be touched. The rule we follow while exploring is take nothing but pictures and leave nothing but footprints. The urge to touch or take things is so strong, but the karma is a butt kicker if you do. The feeling of being watched as the 3 of us wandered around. One room was completely empty with the exception of a fully decorated Christmas tree standing in the middle of the room. The real spooky part was that the tinsel was moving, floating in the air around the tree with no AC or heat. The effect was like the tree was electrified. That room felt cold while the place was really warm. Made goosebumps on my skin. We wandered around each room, and it felt like there was someone sitting in each black room waiting. The air was so still, and not a sound was heard except for us. It felt smothering. We found our way into the kitchen, white with stainless steel everywhere. Pots and pans hung from the walls. It was quite nice. Something was still in the fridge when I opened it. Seems they left in a hurry. As we stood in the unsettling darkness, I said out loud jokingly, "I'm hungry and fixing on making breakfast." As soon as I said that, instantly a noise from the far side of the kitchen broke the silence. All flashlights jerked to the sound. "Nothing," I said, "maybe some steak and eggs." Again a sound from the other side of the kitchen, all light beams moved to see. "Nothing." I repeated breakfast items, and the noises increased all around us until I said Brussels sprouts. At that point it went deathly quiet. It seems that even ghosts don't like the sprouts. I decided that since I woke up to something there and I couldn't even put the smell of breakfast in the air, I would upset the ghosts, so it was time to leave. But, as I mentioned before, we didn't remember which room we came in from, and a small panic in the darkness started. Emma remembered that the room across from us was the sunroom. We used a map on the wall to find the sunroom and beat feet to get out. As I exited through the window and gently closed it, I swear I could hear somebody say goodbye. The sensation of being watched as we walked away was haunting. Someone or something was with me there. So this encounter happened to me when I was around 10 to 12 years old. This took place in my school, mind you, it's a Baptist Christian school in the Philippines as well. Before anything else, I'd like to give a short description/context leading to how I froze for what felt like 2 to 5 minutes. The neighboring slum area, which includes my school, is still currently on fire, however, only the 3rd floor has been affected. Folks told me that the firewall had a hole from the flames that went up meters high, thus burning the bookshelves behind the hole. After that fateful event, I spent a lot of time reflecting on what the area looked like after the entire ordeal. So I made myself a plan about getting up and exploring the 3rd floor. It was after exams day, and I was about to head home when I noticed something that made me smile. The gate leading up to the 3rd floor wasn't locked, so I ran up and the only light that the floor could best provide was coming from a huge ventilation fan behind me, and everything, and I mean everything, was burnt black. The floor was slippery, too, due to the ashes. This floor was for high school students and has 4 rooms for high school years 1 to 4. This floor was designed as a hallway, with comfort rooms and classrooms located at the end on the left, and the only exit was the way I had entered. I explored every room, getting progressively quieter as the noises from the playgrounds and cars were suppressed the deeper I went. I pulled out my flashlight to help, and I saw all the furniture burned black. I was in the hole where the flames supposedly reached to consume this floor. Now for me to enter the last room, I didn't feel any fear for ghosts or how dark it was there. I was just amazed exploring this that isn't meant for kids my age. This last room had a Bible that looked like it was unscathed, and of course I picked it up and flipped pages. I don't know what I was expecting, so I just dropped it on the floor thinking it was nothing. Then I could have sworn I heard faint laughter from what I can best describe as an old witch woman laughing around the opposite corner from me. I then immediately shined my light to where I thought it came from, only to see nothing but a small rock rolling towards me. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. I felt like it took too long for me to move, but it was probably only seconds. Nonetheless, I ran away without looking back to see who or what had been with me there. This was only the beginning of the horrors I experienced throughout my years when I was a student of this school. Whispers and the wind in an abandoned graveyard. I practice black magic, so I keep venturing into unknown isolated territories to find the perfect spot for my rituals, and I keep getting weird and creepy experiences at new locations. After spending more than a decade doing this, I am very much used to such experiences. But once in a while, the experience is so intense and the air feels so thick that it sends a chill to my spine. During the new moon solar eclipse on Sunday, 21 of September, I set out to do a ritual to invoke a strong shadow being for the first time. The location was an abandoned graveyard 3 hours drive from where I live. I had to park my car behind it and walk for 20 to 25 minutes into the forest. As I got closer to the graveyard, it felt like there was someone walking beside me, like I could feel their presence. As this was the most suitable day for the black magic, I knew that negative energies would be at peak power, and the behavior of any existing spirit/beings would be disturbing. I ignored whatever was happening, picked a spot for my ritual, and started cleaning it. Once I cleaned the place, I turned back to unpack my things, and I felt the wind, and the spot was filled with leaves and dirt again. I cleaned it once again, and the wind blew once again for the next 5 seconds and stopped. The spot was messy again, but this time I noticed that it was exactly like I found it when I arrived there. I started hearing whispers that I couldn't understand. I decided that whatever exists at that place should not be messed with, likely, so I changed the spot and did the ritual. I could hear the whispers until the middle of the ritual, and then they stopped. I finished the got ritual and left the place without turning back. My experiences while living near a cemetery and mausoleum. Yes, it's true what they say about living near a cemetery, you are more likely to be haunted. I would know because I experienced a few hauntings myself. I was around 18 when I first moved into my new place. I lived with my boyfriend, who was a few years older, and we did share some experiences, but I seemed to be more alone. The cemetery and mausoleum were about 50 feet from our place. And it is a decent-sized cemetery. Horrible nightmares plagued my sleep, and I would wake up scrambling from my side of the bed. One time I even pushed my BF off the bed completely. I remember frantically trying to get away from whatever I was seeing in my sleep. I had always reassured myself that I suffered from sleep paralysis. The uncomfortable sensation of being awake but unable to move your body. But seeing and hearing what was going on around you. It started at a young age, around 7 to 8, and lasted until I was in my late 20s. When it happened, I would talk to myself and attempt to keep calm. So when it started in my new place, I really didn't associate the new horrifying experiences with my new place. What were my dreams? It would involve something standing by my bed. Nothing of significance would happen other than I was aware of the presence. Most of the times I would just say, okay, it's just a dream, there is nothing to be scared of, and you'll wake up soon. Sometimes, however, this did not occur, and I was not aware. Instead, I would scramble from my side of the bed. It didn't happen every night. But enough to suck. Later on, I started experiencing more obvious things. I would walk around the cemetery. The road was dirt, and since I was no longer afraid and felt more comforted by it, I would run around the cemetery. There usually weren't many visitors, but the occasional family member did visit their loved ones laid to rest. I didn't run then. But otherwise, it was a calm atmosphere. I never felt creeped out or anything. If anything, I felt like nothing bad would happen to me. I never thought something would follow me home. One day, and oh boy, I have goosebumps while writing this memory, I was getting ready for my run. I was leaning over tying my shoes when something knocked on the glass table directly in front of me. 3 knocks. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3. I stopped what I was doing and was shocked still. I remember thinking, did I just hear that? And then, right next to my head on the wall, came 3 more clear knocks. This time I jumped up and ran to my BF, who was in our bedroom getting dressed. I was freaking out and telling him what I heard. He believed me. He checked outside, to make sure no one was actually knocking on our door, and no one was there. Not even next door. We also experienced problems with our fire alarms. They would go off at random times during the night. We tried everything. New batteries, they would start, and we would go check them, and the fire alarms would stop, and we would go back to bed. Then it would start again. My boyfriend was more religious, so he broke out his Bible one time. We were both pretty spooked. Finally, we just removed the batteries from the alarm and went back to bed. It wasn't safe, but we didn't know what else to do. We purchased new fire alarms, but they would still go off. I always told my boyfriend that the noise was probably caused by bugs. In the South, it's definitely a plausible explanation. Around that time, I started telling the things by my bed to go away. I would say, I don't want you here, and you need to leave. I would strain with all of my being to get my point across. I honestly didn't know whether to be alarmed or relieved when it started to help. This all happened over a span of about 8 years. When we broke up and I moved back in with my parents, it all stopped. The only other occurrence was when I spent the night at my new boyfriend's residence nearly 4 years later. I told it to leave me alone and go away. It never happened again. I could have simply grown out of my sleep paralysis. Or whatever it was. Thanks for listening to my long-winded story, and it feels good to get it all out. Something followed me home from the cemetery. My boyfriend and I have been listening some stories like these together just for fun, and it made us realize we actually had a strange experience of our own that might be worth sharing here. We're mostly curious if anyone has thoughts or has experienced something similar. Last summer, 2024, my boyfriend, his sister, and I were really into paranormal stuff. It's important to note that we were almost always drinking when we went on these little adventures, which probably made us more careless and less respectful than we should have been. Looking back, I'm honestly surprised we didn't come across more paranormal activity because of how little we took it seriously at the time. At the time, we were living less than a quarter mile from a local cemetery. His sister and I probably went there at least 50 times, just wandering around. The cemetery had 2 main sections. One side was more lit and felt normal enough, but the other side had a noticeably bad vibe. We all agreed on that. It felt darker, heavier. One night, feeling a little bolder than usual, I decided to walk through the darker side. As we walked, I felt this really strange, unexplained pull, like something was drawing me forward. I kept looking back without fully understanding why. My boyfriend noticed and started leading us back toward the other side, telling me to turn around. I remember brushing it off and saying something like, "Let's just go back," but the feeling stuck with me. We left and talked about how weird it was, but I didn't think much of it at the time. One small detail that might be connected, though I'm not sure, is that around that same time, my boyfriend picked up a loose flower that had fallen from a bouquet on someone's grave. Nothing immediately happened, but I've always wondered if that mattered. The timeline after that is fuzzy, because whatever was going on happened gradually. It took a while before we really noticed something was wrong. One of the first things was a sudden, very strong perfume smell in the trailer we were living in. It was extremely specific, not something either of us owned or had smelled before. It reminded me of an old, antique perfume your grandma might wear, but amplified, like 10 times stronger. The smell would just linger without explanation. Around the same time, my energy started to feel off. I can't fully explain it. I just felt wrong. One night, my boyfriend casually mentioned that he could see a spirit attached to me, a little boy. He wasn't trying to scare me, but the way he said it made my heart drop. I already knew something wasn't right before he ever said it. Neither of us felt the need to question it or panic. It was almost like we both instinctively understood that something had crossed a line, possibly at the cemetery. We ended up using sage in the trailer and returning the flower to the grave. After that, it felt like things slowly went back to normal. I still wonder about it sometimes. Was there actually a spirit attached to me? What was the perfume smell? Did something follow me home because of that pull I felt in the cemetery? If anyone has thoughts or similar experiences, I'd really love to hear them. I've been drawn to the paranormal since an early age. There was a small cemetery in rural Illinois that I'd go to at night to take pictures from grade school through early college. It was fairly old. There were graves from the 1800s as well as people from today. There weren't a lot of houses around either, just farms spread out across cornfields. Over the years I collected a few pictures of orbs and some mists. I've had quite a few experiences as the result of these visits. The one that makes me feel the least comfortable goes like this. It was a quiet night at the cemetery taking pictures with my father and younger brother, the early days of my excursions out there in the dead of night. No strangeness or anything out of the ordinary occurred while we were there, just a cool night out in the country under a billion stars. When we got home we put my dad's SD card in the computer and discovered that he had gotten quite a good picture of a ghostly mist over a grave. I don't have the picture, but it looked like you could have been holding a lit cigarette under the lens, you get the idea. Not long afterwards, our dog started barking out the window next to the computer. He barked consistently for about 20 minutes. It wasn't odd for him to bark outside, it was the timing. So we went outside and looked around, but there were no squirrels or any other creatures of the night, so I went to bed and passed out. I opened my eyes to see my red digital clock was at 3 a.m. on the dot. I sleep with no lights, so my room was pitch black, and over the stillness of the night I heard this faint sliding sound. It was very smooth, like soft wood on carpet. My eyes were open, but my mind was mostly asleep, so I didn't really process the sound and went back to sleep. I woke up in the morning for school and looked at my desk in the corner of the room. The wooden chair had been pulled out from my desk and turned to face my bed, perfectly. My desk was right next to the door in my room, and if the chair wasn't pushed in, then I wouldn't be able to get out, so I always kept it in when I wasn't using it. The implication of that still gives me chills every time I think about it. That experience changed the way I approach the paranormal. Since then, when I'm leaving a place after poking around, I'm always very polite but firm in saying out loud that potential spirits are not welcome to follow me home, and it's pretty much worked for me ever since. I ended up having a few more strange things happen in my room over the course of about a year. There'd be the occasional but very obvious feeling of a presence, day and night, and one night I was wide awake in bed when it felt like someone sat on the end of it. I made a bargain with this spirit not long after that. If it must stay, then it can have my room for half the day when I'm gone but must leave me alone when I'm home. I was never bothered again. Could I have brought something home? What do you think? I'm going to start in October 2020. I was living by myself, and my ex-boyfriend had just gone overseas. Everything was fine at first, and to occupy my time, I would go to abandoned places to speak with the recently deceased, or I would be busy at work. One night, my best friend Max and I traveled to an abandoned cemetery in North Carolina, which is 4 hours away from home. I was using a spirit box to communicate after 2 hours and getting a lot of disturbing feedback. I started to feel ill. I told Max it was time to go. I was not feeling great. Well, I dropped Max at home and finally got back to my place. My dog Kona and I went to bed. On Monday, as usual, I go to work. At that time, I worked as a maintenance worker for my apartment complex, which allowed me to receive a discount on my rent to help manage my bills, especially since my partner was overseas. Well, after a long day at work, I came home at 5 as usual to clean up, eat, and go to bed this night. I went to sleep, but something seemed a little odd, as I was woken up by my dog growling at the closet that was closed. I brushed it off, thinking maybe my neighbors may have scared her a bit. I went back to sleep and was woken up in the morning by her barking at the now open closet door. I shrugged it off, thinking that perhaps the closet door was cracked open and the draft caused it to swing open while I was taking her out and getting ready for work. Well, a couple of days go by and nothing happens. Well, Friday of that week I had just gotten off work and made dinner and sat down on my couch to watch TV. I then start to see my dog get up and start barking and growling, which I've never seen her do before, at the empty dark bathroom. She then proceeded to crawl over there little by little, growling. She then jumps back, barking and growling more, and runs to her kennel beside me. I got up from the couch to see what she was scared of. I started to feel unsettled and went to shut all the doors to my bathroom and bedroom. Let's just say I never went back to that part of the house again. I started to sleep on my couch more. My dog was still uneasy in the home, and she didn't want to leave her kennel. I then decided to bring her to my parents' house to stay, feeling she will be more at peace. There, now feeling depressed and alone, I pick up a drinking problem to ease my nerves so I can get good sleep. It turns out that was a bad idea. I then started to develop sleep paralysis, where I'm sleeping on my couch watching TV like normal, but I can't move in the hallway. I can see this figure of a man, and he gets closer each time I go to sleep one night. In November of 2020 I went to sleep as normal. I then went into sleep paralysis. I couldn't move. I can see the TV but also a figure that looks to be my ex-lover. Let's call Tom. Tom walks up and starts to talk. I can't remember what he said, but he looked to be dark like the night sky. He didn't have the facial features of my lover, though. It made me angry, and I then was able to move off the couch to shove the figure out the door and say, "You are not my lover, and slammed the door in his face and locked it, walked back to the couch, and lay down. I woke up wondering, what just happened? And thought it might have been a dream of some sort. I got ready for work and left for the day. As I came back that night, I was just too tired to drink and go out to the bar. I fell asleep on the couch as I did before. I then went into sleep paralysis that night, but it was different, it was scary. Then, the night before, the room felt heavy, and it seemed very quiet, and I couldn't move or see anyone. All I saw was my cover and my TV. I then pretended that I was sleeping so whatever it was would just leave me alone. Well, things started to take a real turn for the worse when it grabbed me by the neck and pushed me up and down violently into the couch. I take what I can, pray, and say, God, please help me, several times until it shoves me back into the couch. I then wake up and grab my keys and phone and run out the door, not knowing what just happened to me, but it still feels heavy in the house. I lock my door to my place, and I start to call my mom. Let's just say I didn't step foot back into that house last night. I ended up sleeping in my car. What do you think? Did I bring something with me, or do you believe my mind was deceiving me? Dartford Cemetery. Last year, a good friend and I went on a haunted road trip through the Midwest. One of our stops was at a place I've heard about since I was a kid, Dartford Cemetery. It was at night on the 4th of July, and a fireworks show had just ended, leaving the air smelling of sulfur. We parked under a streetlight a little bit down the road from the cemetery to set up our equipment, GoPro, voice recorder, etc. We started on the side of the cemetery that has been known to have the most activity with the mausoleum and the chief's headstone. After a few minutes of no activity, we start hearing footsteps and see the figure of a person walking towards us in complete darkness. Several moments passed until we crossed paths with this person, but both my friend and I wanted to keep moving past. As we approached the figure, they said, "What are you doing here?" My friend said, "Nothing." "What are you doing here?" No response. To this day, neither of us can agree on this person's age or even their gender. I thought it was a younger man, but my friend saw and heard an elderly woman. Nothing but their voice shows up on our recording. What we both agree on is that this person had abnormally long, white limbs. We kept on walking, and the person disappeared from view when we turned around to look. We continued our investigation with the presence of this person in mind but not in sight. We eventually came across the chief's headstone, where I placed a token of respect to him. When we looked back on the GoPro, shortly after this moment, you can hear a hushed, disembodied male voice say, "Run." Since we didn't hear this in real time, we kept moving on towards the center of the cemetery. Out of nowhere I start hearing footsteps of what seemed like a dozen or more people in front of us. When I asked my friend if she heard that, she said she didn't hear a thing. Suddenly I told her I felt very surrounded, and then we had to leave immediately. We got back to the path and ran all the way to the street, where I finally felt we were safe. But it didn't end there. As we walked back to the car, we saw that same person walking on the side of the street towards us. We crossed the street and avoided eye contact as much as possible. When we were just past them, we turned around briefly, and they had their necks turned all the way around looking at us. We ran to the car, and all the way I was holding the GoPro in order to try and get this on video. Strangely enough, the person did not show up on the recording even when they were standing under a street light. We never saw this person take even a step off the cemetery grounds. Thoroughly spooked, we drove away with an uneasy feeling until we crossed the town line. Something is there. Even if that figure was a real person, I know there are many active entities at that cemetery. Side note, fellow ghost hunters, please remember to be respectful at sites such as these. Leave no trace, reach out politely, and remember many of these souls have living relatives. Creepy abandoned house experience. This goes back several decades, when I was a young boy. I grew up in a small countryside town of a couple thousand people. Back in those days there were several abandoned properties scattered on the edges of town. I have not seen homes completely abandoned like that anywhere since those childhood times. Anyway, there was a large Victorian-style abandoned home on the outskirts, a short bike ride from my home. I was about 9 years old. I figure other kids had checked the place out sometime since it had a full-on horror movie look, but I had never been inside yet. A bunch of friends, about 6 to 7, decided to search it one day for something to do. Everyone was trying to scare each other in a goofy way, but nobody was really scared. Although it was boarded up and securely fastened, we took the boards off of a basement window. Glass was long gone, but we took precautions on the ledge with a blanket. Entry was planned in advance. We all jumped down into the basement. It was pitch black, oddly so dark, we thought, as it was daytime. However prepared we were, each was armed with a flashlight. Everyone fanned out to search all the basement rooms. There were many, as the home was huge. I was alone in an empty room within earshot of the others, when my flashlight died. I had changed the batteries before we left. Even though my friends were in adjacent rooms/halls with flashlights, I saw nothing, complete, perfect darkness. I felt sick. I remained still, not moving or touching anything. Then I started screaming for my friends. It seemed to take them a bit to track my voice and find me, but it likely just felt that way. We all decided to get out of the basement and into the light on the main level. My friends had found the stairs. We went upstairs into the well-lit living room. The house lived up to expectations. Giant fireplace, huge regal stairs winding up to the second level, etc. People were about to fan out again when a couple of friends insisted on going straight upstairs immediately. I felt sick again. As they started to climb the stairs, I looked down to grab the handrail. I was shocked. Both my hands were covered in blood. At first I wasn't sure it was blood, just dirt or something. But I licked my knuckle, it was definitely blood. When and how did this happen? As I said, I had touched nothing. Even entering the building, I had hopped through and not used my hands. The weirdest part was that the blood was completely dry. It was so dry it was flaky. Even if I cut them, how could they dry so fast? As I looked over both sides of both hands for any nicks or cuts, and finding none, I called my friends back. Everyone was pretty skeptical and assumed I picked up something sharp. However, they must have been creeped out because I said I wanted to leave, and they all left with me. Sorry, no big scary ending. That's it. Never went back. Have no backstory on the house. It was demolished within a year to make way for new development. Ghost in Cemetery in Lebanon, New Hampshire. So about maybe 2 years ago now I lived in New Hampshire. I work a lot, so I used to go for a walk in the cemetery because it was always quiet and peaceful. Well, I was enjoying the quiet, and the fall colors on the trees were amazing. As I walked, an older man with white hair came walking towards me, and I remember thinking that it was odd that I did not hear a car come up the hill to the cemetery. So I looked back, no car, so I figured he had walked up the hill. As he got closer to me, I noticed he was very well dressed. He was wearing a blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, and a nice pair of Nike shoes. He was also wearing a red button-down socks hat. As we passed each other, I said hello, and he said hello but never looked at me. I did not think much about it. Where he passed me was a gravel trail in the cemetery for cars to drive around. He passed me right at a turn on the road, and I had noticed I did not hear his footsteps on the gravel as he went by. It was less than a minute when I turned around to look at him, but he was gone. There is no way he could have gone anywhere. The cemetery is very open, with not many trees. I then spent the next 30 minutes looking for him everywhere. He was so solid looking. Just amazing to witness. I have had a lot of paranormal events. Would love to hear about yours. I wasn't superstitious until I moved into my girlfriend's mom's house as a teenager. I have a plethora of stories after living there for about 2 years. Here are a few that stand out for me. My young love's mother, fully Mexican and Catholic, bought the house from her mother, who had owned it for a long time, just like the many properties just like it that she rented out. This was a duplex with one half abandoned. They also told me about finding a large pentagram drawn in the middle of the floor in the upstairs room, which was the room that she and I shared. The story of how this location became haunted goes like this. A little boy and his mother were hurt and ended by the drunk father. 1. I don't know if that actually happened or how true it really is, guys, but that's the story I was told by an old Mexican woman who definitely believed what she was telling me. What I do know for sure is that house is haunted. So my GF's mother was a functioning alcoholic and would pass out on the living room couch every night, which was directly beneath our room. We happened to be getting home from a bar, and we were both very drunk, and my girlfriend's mom was also quite drunk. So we get home and see that her mom is snoring asleep on the couch facing away from us with her underwear at half-mast. We never dared wake her up, so we just went directly upstairs to our room, turned on a movie, and fell asleep easily. I don't know how long we were asleep before we both shot up in bed because there was a huge loud crash of what sounded like glass breaking. We both jumped up, still very much in unison, and we both ran down the stairs because we were both thinking the exact same thing. We expected to find Mom had lost her balance trying to get to the bathroom and fallen into the entertainment center where they kept a bunch of those tall spiritual candles that you see at roadside memorials, you know? Mexican, we thought it was about to be a big mess and a hospital trip, but when she and I crammed into the living room, we looked to find her mom passed out. She didn't hear a thing or budge. Sarah and I never said a single word. We turned around and walked back up and went to bed. In addition to strange incidents like that, we frequently heard footsteps above us while sitting in the living room, and we would watch through the dining room into the kitchen, where we saw shadows moving around and heard dishes clanking. At night, we would listen to footsteps starting from the bottom of the stairs. They'd walk up and then through the room that leads to ours, and then they'd stop right when they reached our bedroom doorway. Always. One night I jerked awake and already had the feeling that I get when I hear noises, like I'm falling backwards in a chair, and the house was still. I hear the steps begin, and I turn quickly to face the wall. My face is an inch from the wall. I was in this position listening, and right when the steps stopped in the doorway, there was a loud, hard, single bang directly on the other side of the wall from where my face was. Weird cemetery experience. So I can't exactly say that I'm convinced that ghosts exist, but I had one experience that seriously made me question that, and it was back in high school after getting my license. There was a cemetery in my suburban hometown that was somewhat well known in the state for being associated with murders and a hot spot for sightings of shadowy figures. It was getting close to Halloween, so I and two friends decided to sneak in there at 3 a.m. One of my buddies chickened out and stayed in my car, but the other went with me, and we walked around the place for a bit, and nothing really happened, and we decided to leave before we could get caught, as we were all sneaking out and past curfew for our age. Before we left, we wanted to get a picture of me in front of the largest gravestone in the area. Yes, this is pretty disrespectful. In my defense, I was dumb as hell. I positioned myself directly in front of the gravestone, and my friend took a picture. At the same time as the flash went off, his phone began to shut down. I didn't really think much of it and went to hand my phone to him. As I was doing that, I noticed my phone was also in the process of shutting down. He swore that his phone was charged, and I knew for a fact my phone was at 60%. We thought it was a little weird and decided to leave with at least something interesting happening. I dropped off the last guy, and shortly after he entered his house, I saw the Apple logo showing that my phone was turning on again without me touching it. A minute after it turns on, I hear 3 separate notifications for my message, each like a second apart. The contact just read unknown, and the messages all read unknown message. I was pretty freaked the entire ride home after that. The next day after that I couldn't help but feel watched in my house. At one point, I was in my garage, and I could have sworn I heard breathing just on the other side of the garage door. As if someone was lying down looking through the crack under the garage door. A part of me felt like I had this guy's spirit following me around for a day. I know all of these things separately are explainable, but I can't help but think of how crazy of a coincidence it is for all of them to happen when and where they did. Also the fact that it had never happened on my phone before and hasn't happened since. Please let me know what you guys think. A few experiences from my childhood. Background: growing up, I used to live next to a cemetery. I know, cemetery, for about the first 12 years of my life. The cemetery was traditionally quiet. There weren't many visitors, but as a child, I remember thinking the cemetery was enormous. My room had 2 windows, one directly looking at the cemetery and another where you could see the backyard, but the cemetery ran parallel to the backyard, so you could still see a good amount of it. The first experience that I can recall was that of a little boy. I was about 6 at the time, and my brothers and best friend were getting ready to go outside and play. Through the window in the living room, which pointed out the street, I saw this boy, my age, with one of those balls you buy at the supermarket, those small balls that are white and have cloud-like colors on them. He was alone, and I thought, hey, we should ask him to play with us. I went downstairs and was outside before anyone else. He looked sad, I remember, so I asked him if he wanted to play. He gave a big smile, and I turned around to tell everyone he was going to join, and when I turned back, he was gone. Fast forward a few years, I was about 9 or 10. My cousin, who is 2 years older than me, and a friend who is my age were over. We were outside by the fence that divided the house and the cemetery. P.S. The couch was against the fence because my landlord was throwing it out. We could see over the fence when we stood on it. So, the 3 of us were looking out into the cemetery, and I noticed this black man standing over a grave. I watched him for a while until he lay down on the grass. I was confused, so I told my cousin and friend what I saw. They each told me that they didn't see the same thing I did, but instead, they were observing different people. My cousin saw an old couple holding hands over a grave, and my friend saw a lady in black walking down one of the aisles. Needless to say, we ran into the house pretty freaked out. One day when doing homework in the kitchen, approximately age 7/8, I was sitting alone, and when I looked up, I saw this man. I didn't recognize him, but he was sitting in front of me with a smile. He had a glass of what I recognized as soda. He motioned for me to continue, so I did, and when I looked again, he was gone. A week later at my aunt's house, I see the picture of the man on her fridge. I ask my parents who that is. It turns out that the man in the picture was my grandfather on my dad's side. He came to the US alone in his 50s to try to make money to send back to Colombia for my grandma, my aunts, uncles, and my dad. He died in the States alone. The last event I will discuss for now involves a man I have known since my childhood. Recently I have only felt his presence from time to time, but I have not seen him since I was about 13 or 14, I am 22 now. I can remember clearly what he looks like. He was black in a white tuxedo, he had a bow tie. He also wore a top hat. Black shoes. He had a wide smile on his face. He gave me this friend-type vibe. I never was afraid of him. He always piqued my curiosity. He has never spoken to me, only smiled. Every time I see him, a name comes to mind that starts with a C, but I can't remember it right now. Kanta. That sounds right. He has a very specific presence that I can always recognize, but I've never quite understood why he's been present. I have a lot more. I will tell once I feel comfortable enough. Something followed my friend from Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Chicago. This happened to a childhood friend of mine, and he's sworn that it's completely true. So, this past Saturday, my friend D and I were hanging out throughout the whole day lifting weights and sparring in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. After a physically exhausting day, we grabbed some burritos and headed over to his house to watch some horror films, which were quite cheesy, if I might add. When the final film ended, we made the decision to end our evening, and D took me back to my house. As we were talking in the car, D abruptly shifted the conversation to his paranormal experiences. Apparently, last summer, approximately a year ago, he was really into going to haunted places around the Chicagoland area and trying to see if he could experience anything paranormal. He mentioned places like the O'Hare Airport landing strip, where the AA-191 crash occurred, and the Resurrection Cemetery on the south side of the city. Amidst all of his stories, he decided to tell me his most interesting experience at the Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, which is considered by many to be the most haunted cemetery in the world. In this particular experience, D, his cousin M, and his friend T went to the cemetery. If you guys are not familiar with the topography of the area, the cemetery is located deep within a forest preserve. D and his company parked on the outermost area of the forest preserve around 3 a.m. and began to walk a few miles through the woods with a pair of flashlights in order to reach the cemetery right in the middle of the preserve. From D's account, the walk there was uneventful, but they felt as if they were being followed, and as a result, they kept looking back only to find just darkness staring right back at them. This uneasiness quickened the pace of the group, and they finally reached the cemetery after half an hour. Once at the cemetery, the guys roamed around carefully inspecting the vandalized tombstones and grave markers around the area. M and T were tense and a bit creeped out from the walk, but they managed to talk to each other for quite a bit to calm their nerves. However, D suddenly heard whispers near the forest and told everyone to shut up. Everyone went to a crouch and began to listen. There were indeed whispers nearby, but none of the guys could pinpoint where they were coming from. A few minutes later, D broke the silence with a yelp, immediately sprinting towards the cemetery entrance. Eventually, M and T managed to catch up with D and inquire about the incident. Apparently D was grabbed by the wrist by some unforeseen entity, and as a result, the group decided to go back to see if they can experience the same thing again. By the time they could go back to the place where they heard the whispers, they heard a clear voice of a woman screaming from the cemetery pond nearby. All three of the guys lost it and ran back to the car, but they managed to stop past the entrance of the cemetery to make sure they didn't run aimlessly through the woods and get lost. By this time, it was raining heavily with thunder, and it seemed straight out of a horror film. The guys decided to head back to the car at a jogging pace. About halfway back to the car, they saw two silhouettes with lights in front of the trail about 100 yards away from them. Thinking that they were cops, the guys immediately ran off the trail and hid in a nearby bush. However, they quickly realized that the silhouettes did not belong to cops because the lights were dimming and intensifying in an unrecognizable pattern. Moreover, the lights seemed to hover over the ground without having the bouncing effect that you would see from a person walking with a flashlight. Scared shitless, D and the others remained frozen until the lights disappeared. At this point, the guys made a mad dash for the car, and they fortunately made it, but D swore that he saw the lights following them when he looked back over his shoulder. With their nerves at an intense level, the three of them booked it in their car. You guys would think that this would be the end of that experience, but it doesn't end there. For a full week after the experience, D felt as if some entity followed him home from the cemetery. When he was home by himself, he was home alone a lot because his mother works late quite frequently. He would get a sense of being watched, and he would constantly hear a distinct shuffle of footsteps over the carpeted floor when no one else was in the house. Additionally, objects would shift or vanish entirely. In one instance, he laid a pull-up bar leaning on the corner of the room all by itself, and right after he let go of it, the bar fell in the opposite direction from where it was leaning. All these paranormal things aren't limited to times when he was awake. When he would be about to sleep on his bed, he would see this distinctly outlined black/gray haze/fog in one of the top corners of his bedroom. D would try to ignore it and pull the covers over his head, hoping it would go away, but it would never disappear. This happened starting in the middle of the week, and he let it go on for about 2 nights until he moved his bed so that he wouldn't have to face the particular corner where the fog was. By the end of the week, D had had enough and decided to deal with this issue. I don't know where he got this idea, but he burned everything that he wore and had on the night he visited Bachelor's Grove, basically anything associated with the experience. Apparently, he thought by removing anything associated with that night, whatever followed him home wouldn't be able to do so. Surprisingly, it worked, but as he was burning the clothes and items, he heard a distinct demonic voice shrieking as if it were in pain. D's older sister was there when he burned the things, and she also confirmed that she heard the shriek. Right after burning the items, D immediately felt a sense of relief, as if a burden was lifted from his shoulders. After this experience/incident, D still visits haunted locations, and he even went back to Bachelor's Grove on a few occasions, although he went with a larger group of friends. What's interesting is that whenever D goes out on these visits, he has the habit of pouring rock salt around his car and house to prevent anything from following him back home. My encounters within Waikumete Cemetery. I'd lived right across the road from Waikumete Cemetery for a little under 15 years and enjoyed regular walks through it, as well as training for distance running back when I was able-bodied and free of injury. As the largest cemetery in New Zealand, it has been the subject of many paranormal occurrences: the black figure that stands watch at the old chapel, a man in a top hat walking among the headstones, and even eerie feelings near an old tree where the bodies of 2 convicted killers are buried are just a few examples. My experiences with the place have been relatively tame but curious nonetheless. 1. In mid-2012, I and a friend decided to take a stroll through the cemetery in the late evening, around 11:30. This was our first such excursion, and we'd agreed to meet at the crematorium before venturing out. I arrived at 11:20 and looked towards the entrance of the crematorium, where I saw a dark silhouette that I initially thought was my friend pacing impatiently outside beneath the light. This figure had the build of a heavy-set male and exhibited body language typical of someone who had been waiting for a while, but he lacked any truly distinguishable features and was standing directly under the lights outside the building. I called out from no more than 50 meters from where he was and said, "Hey bro, I didn't think you'd actually show up." He then proceeded to walk away to my right-hand side, northwest, and behind the building, completely ignoring what I'd just said. I called out and said, "Bro, where are you going?" and was about to give chase when something inside me said, "Turn the duck around and run." It was as if some force stopped me dead in my tracks and made me realize what it was I was about to follow in complete darkness. Hastily retreating to the entrance, I spun around once near the gate and took off sprinting up Great North Road. And who did I see 200 meters up past the lights on Hepburn Road? My friend was strolling down as if he were the big boss man. I was certain that it definitely wasn't him playing tricks on me, because he wasn't that quick and would have been rolling on the ground, winded, if he had been. I detailed to him what I saw, and he almost hightailed it and headed back home. The only other incident that night was the tapping we heard near the Erebus Memorial beside Great North Road. We actually sought the source since I was adamant that it was only a tree grazing the fence or a little flower fan thing with something stuck in it, but no, the sound was coming from directly behind a headstone and stopped immediately once I said, "There it is." 2. Mid-2013. There's an Europa, Maori cemetery, at the top of the cemetery, in the southwest corner below the water tank, which I walked past one night after venturing out for a pack march and going a bit further than I'd anticipated. The time was 2,130 hours or thereabouts when I entered and made my way down past the Europa. No vehicles were present, and no people were walking around. People who do stroll through at night tend to keep their flashlights handy from what I've encountered. Striding past it, I heard humming from a man's voice. It was discordant and had no real depth despite being hummed, as if this person was humming for the sake of humming. There were a few scattered lights inside the Europa itself and minimal illumination from off the hill, but I didn't identify anyone around that area whatsoever. My first thought was perhaps someone or something was trying to hum Te Pū, which is a Ngapui chant detailing support/sustenance and emphasis on the first and last Pū, whānau, family, and Wairua, spirit. Perhaps an old man was drinking and chanting for a loved one at that hour, but I can't shake the feeling that a kahua, ghost, or a guardian was watching over someone specific. With 30 kilograms on my back and legs weary from marching 8 kilometers already, I ran my black arse the duck out of there and stopped at the top of the road leading down past the mausoleums. After catching my breath, I made my way down to Akmina Avenue, followed it some 400 meters, and turned onto Frisia Road. I went past a section to my right, east, and heard the strained crying of an infant. The sound grew slightly louder the more I looked towards that particular section. Like the idiot I am, I called out to the crying infant with a quiver in my voice, saying, "What's the matter, Peppy?" and expected that some spirit would smite me or something. Instead, the crying grew faint until eventually it was no more. That was it. I soon realized that the crying was coming from the children's sanctuary, which I believe was undergoing reconstruction at the time. I had thought that only stillborn babies were interred there, since I don't think a stillborn would cry? But I can't be too sure. Perhaps it was just the exhaustion affecting me at that moment, but the experience has stayed with me ever since, along with all my encounters with the paranormal. I've been in a group based in Ft. Leonard Wood, Missouri, for almost 16 years. One of my first investigations was in Illinois in a location called the Ashmore Estate. That night we encountered full shadow figures. They ducked in the doors as soon as we rounded a couple of corners. Then we also saw one directly in front of us about 20 feet away. Later that night we heard laughter and the sound of running. One of my team members had something thrown towards them. I believe we have them on audio and camera. A couple of years ago, we went to Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. I encountered a doppelganger. We were broken into 3 groups. While we were on the 3rd floor, we walked around separately for a couple of moments, and we called out if we experienced anything strange. We gathered in a small patient room. 2 of us came walking in, and then the 3rd member stood at the door. We turned, and then they were gone. The 3rd member came in, and we were like, "Where did you go so quickly?" We asked him. Then the reply was chilling. He told us he was walking around in the hall when we called out. We told him about our experience, and he appeared visibly terrified, just like we were. Later that night, we were all together in one room doing an EVP session. We observed a couple of objects moving in front of us. A balloon that was weighted scooted across the room whenever we started talking. Whoever spoke, the balloon seemed to follow the voice. The K2 meters were going off the scale. We were witness to all of these events. A couple of weeks ago we went to a location near Kansas City, Missouri. It was an 1800s mansion. We heard footsteps and things moving around. Later that night we tried to sleep there. We heard knocking on doors, footsteps, and an occasional banging sound. Later, after returning home, we found an EVP saying, "Get out," with my name in the end. It was a wonderful experience. I have seen so many more in my years of doing this. These are just a few of my experiences as a paranormal investigator. My friends and I often explored an abandoned mental institute back in high school, and we had a few small encounters that we played off, but there was one encounter that finally made us stop coming back. Okay, so this time we went. It was me and 2 newer guys in our group. They had only been there once, and all the other members of our group, 9 guys, were busy that night. So I figured I'd take them, show them around a bit, and maybe mess with them a bit. The institute in question was opened in 1773, and the building we were in was built in 1920 and closed around 1960. So we were walking around the 2nd floor, and I was taking them to a special room. We called this room the fly room because it had a bunch of insects that had been preserved. Anyway, I waited in the hallway as they were checking it out. I was keeping an eye and ear out for cops or squatters. I hear the sound of sturdy boots walking down the adjacent hallway. Thinking it's a cop, I poke my head in the fly room and tell my buddies to turn off their lights and chill under some furniture. I went back out into the hallway and was standing by a closet, ready to jump in as soon as I saw the officer's light. The footsteps got closer and closer until I thought for sure the officer was about to turn the corner. I was thinking, this is a ballsy cop to come through here without a flashlight. And then I heard the footsteps turn the corner. Keep in mind I can see the corner and the wall behind it. I immediately felt chills as the footsteps approached and stopped right in front of me. I got the feeling that I was being watched. After a minute or 2 of standing there, I felt the presence leave. I immediately went and grabbed my buddies and told them that we needed to leave. We had climbed through a broken window on the 1st floor that was just down the stairs and at the end of the hall. As soon as we reached the bottom of the stairs, there was a loud noise that sounded like something had been thrown at a wall. I asked my buds to go outside and wait. I told them that I was going to check it out because I wanted to believe it was just someone ducking with us. Not only did I have a lot of experience in this place, but the fact that I had a good memory and that we had been in this room earlier let me catch on to what had happened. I turned on my flashlight and walked into the room. I immediately got the feeling that I was being watched, but I could also feel that whatever was watching me was projecting its hate at me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. The room was much colder than the hallway was, very unusual for the South in July, and I immediately noticed what had been thrown against the wall. A wooden chair that my buddies and I had taken pictures of was no longer in the back right corner, it lay in pieces against the wall to my left. I stood in a trance for about 15 to 20 seconds before turning around into a dead sprint towards the window. As soon as I started running, I heard those sturdy boots again, right on my tail. I dove through the empty shell of the window, appreciating whoever had broken most of the glass, and landed roughly on the ground. I got up and started running back towards my truck. My buds caught up to me after a few hundred yards and forced me to stop. They thought I was messing with them and tried to call me out on my bullshit. What I said scared them into following me without question. All I said was just get back to my ducking truck, but my fear choked me, so it didn't come out in my normal joyful or serious voice. It came out rough and scratchy, like I had been screaming for 2 days. We got back to my truck and drove silently, which is very unusual for me. I'm usually very talkative or blaring some new song I found. We get to the cookout, and I've calmed down a bit, but I'm sweaty, so I go to the bathroom to clean up. When I lifted my shirt to undo my belt, a weird habit, I know, I noticed a thin trail of blood on my stomach. I took off my shirt and looked at myself in the mirror. From just above my left nipple to just below the right side of my belly button was a thin scratch that was slightly bleeding. I was worried about it. I figured it happened when I landed from my jump. I immediately snapped a picture and sent it to my friend's group chat. We kind of laughed and joked it off that night, talking about going back with the other guys to investigate. However, that all changed in the morning when I woke up and the cut was gone. Not healed, not scabbed, no scar tissue, but like it had never happened. After sending another picture to the group chat, we all agreed to not go back. But that was 2 years ago, and now we've started thinking about going back. Strange noises from cemetery. I moved into college recently, and there is a cemetery across the road from my dorm building, and last week I and my buddies started seeing things when we were walking around at night. Last Monday my friends walked to a gas station in our town without me, and when they got back, they were talking about seeing what looked like people dressed in all black walking around in the cemetery but just played it off as some kind of trick with shadows from the streetlight and just laughed it off. Every time our group has walked past the cemetery since then, I've had a really big sense of unease. Last night I was walking past it alone, and I saw exactly what they had described, and when I stopped walking, thinking it was just my shadow, it kept moving. I called out and asked if anyone was there, and it stopped. I started walking closer towards it, and there wasn't anything or anyone anywhere to be found. My friends don't believe me. Is this a normal occurrence when living near a cemetery? What do I do if this continues to occur? Why I will always have a cat. I have had cats all my life. When I was 7, my mom's cats TC and Bones suddenly passed away. I was sad because my mom was sad, but I didn't understand death. My brothers were little hellions. The 3 of us got into trouble with the law a few times back then. There was this old house on the corner of our development. It may have been the first house built there. An old colonial farmhouse. My brother and their friends had this grand idea to explore the condemned building. I was afraid, but I didn't want to be left out. So, I followed them inside. James and Luke ran upstairs, exploring the bedrooms. I stayed near the front door in what I think may have been the living room. There were belongings old and dusty, some covered in years of buildup. It smelled like soil and mothballs. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang above me, and then James yelled Luke's name. Jimmy and Jake, twins, my brother's friends, were up there too. I was freaked out. My heart was pounding. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up, electric static surging all over me. I was frozen. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. That is when I saw him. A tall man. Wearing a tattered trench coat. He had a top hat like President Lincoln. His face was elongated with eyes so demonic I could feel the heat in the room. Somehow, a fire was started. It had to have been Jimmy or Jake. My brothers swear to me they didn't set the fire. It wasn't long before my brothers, Jimmy and Jake, found their way outside. Panic forced them to forget I was still inside. I could see the fire blazing at the top of the stairs. I started screaming, still unable to move as the man/it/him began taking steps towards me. I could hear Luke calling my name. I screamed for him to help me. But he didn't come. Instead, something else did. I don't know where it came from. If it lived in that house or if it was a local. A cat. A cat ran past me, and the thing of a man disappeared. It felt like this incredible weight lifted, and I could move again. I ran outside, meeting up with my brothers before we all ran away as sirens screamed in approach. We watched that house burn down. I don't know what happened to the cat. I would have taken it home. I did that sort of thing a lot when I was young. Not long after that, we got Rebel. He was a tuxedo cat. We had him for 8 years. We moved away to a new town. Rebel was an indoor-outdoor cat, mainly because he didn't get along with our Roddy, Bear. Soon, Rebel got sick from a fight. We had to put him down. A few weeks later, my parents had left for a camping trip. Since James and Luke were young adults at this point, and I was 13-ish, they let me stay home. This was back in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon to leave your teenager home alone. I was vacuuming, trying to keep my mind off of Rebel. He was my cat. There was this mirror fixed to the wall in the hallway. My dad couldn't remove it. I watched him hit it with an 8-pound hammer, and it wouldn't break. He said whoever put it there must have used tile glue or something. When I started vacuuming the hallway, I saw my reflection, and it startled me. I looked in the mirror for a second, and that's when I saw him. The trench coat man with a top hat. He wasn't in the mirror, he was in the reflection of the front bay window in the mirror. I snapped around, staring at the window, and Bear growled. I could feel it all again. The weight, the panic, and the heat. Luckily James had just pulled in the driveway. The lights from the car distorted the window, and it vanished. I have seen this thing 3 more times. Each time I didn't own a cat. Over the past 2 decades I have adopted 6 cats. Some cultures believe cats are guardians of the spirit world. They can sense and see things we can't, and if you are close to the cat, it will protect you from evil. I have shared this encounter with a few friends over the years. Some think it is my trauma, others don't know what to believe. It happened to me. I will never not own a cat. I won't take that chance. Even if it is just my trauma manifesting. The Orcadian Devil. For the past few years now, I've been living by the north coast of the Scottish Highlands, in the northernmost town on the British mainland. Like most days here, I routinely walk my dog, Maisie, along the town's beach, which stretches from one end of the bay to the other. One thing I absolutely love about this beach is that on a clear enough day, you can see in the distance the islands of Orkney, famously known for their on a more cloudy or foggy day. It's as if these islands were never even there to begin with, and what you instead see is the ocean and a false horizon. On one particular day, I was walking with Maisie along this very beach. Having let Maisie off her lead to explore and find new smells from the ocean, she is now rummaging through the stacks of seaweed when suddenly, Maisie finds something. What she finds, lying on top of a stack of seaweed, is an animal's skeletal remains. I'm not sure what animal this belongs to exactly, but it's either a sheep or a goat. There are many farms in the region, as well as across the sea in Orkney. My best guess is that an animal on one of Orkney's coastal farms must have fallen off a ledge or cliff and drowned, and its remains eventually washed up here. Although I'm initially taken back by this skeleton, grinning up at me with molar-like teeth, something else about this animal quickly catches my eye. The upper body consists of skeletal remains that are completely picked clean, while the lower body is still intact. It still has its hoofs and wet, dark gray fur, and as far as I can see, all the meat underneath is still intact. Although disturbed by this carcass, I'm also very confused. What I don't understand is why the upper body of this animal had been completely picked off, whereas the lower part hadn't even been touched. What's weirder is the lower body hasn't even decomposed yet and still looks fresh. At the time, my first impression of this dead animal was that it almost seemed satanic, as it reminded me of the image of Baphomet, a goat's head on a man's body. What makes me think this is not only the dark goat-like legs but also the position the carcass is in. Although the carcass belonged to a sheep or goat, the way the skeleton is positioned almost makes it appear hominid. The skeleton is laid on its back, with an arm and leg on each side of its body. I'm not saying what I found that day was the remains of a goat-human creature, obviously not. However, what I do have to mention about this experience is that upon finding the skeleton, something about it definitely felt like a bad omen, and to tell you the truth, it almost could have been. Not long after finding the skeleton washed up on the town's beach, my personal life suddenly takes a somewhat tragic turn. With that being said, and having always been a rather superstitious person, perhaps that's all it was, superstition. Unsettling cemetery experience. I'm going to preface this experience by saying that paranormal experiences are not abnormal to me. I have seen ghosts many times over my life, and my mom claims to have seen me playing with them as a child. My mom was a psychic medium, so I spent a good deal of my childhood around this stuff. But those experiences are for another time. This little blurb is just to assure you that I've had experience with the paranormal before and that what I experienced I consider to be abnormal generally, as most of my experiences up until now have been positive or at least neutral. This was a few years ago in my very early 20s, I'm in my mid to late 20s now. I hadn't had any paranormal experiences since a little while after my mom died when I was a teenager. I was starting to think the things I had experienced didn't happen at all. General denial. One night, while driving around a suburb near my house, I impulsively convinced my boyfriend to accompany me to the local cemetery. I was going through a bit of an edgy phase and thought going to a cemetery at night would be cool. This is a cemetery in a big city, and it is extremely large. I didn't believe in ghosts hanging around in a cemetery, so I thought it'd be fine. I believed that ghosts usually hung around the places they died or places they had unfinished business, and it was very unlikely they'd be hanging around a graveyard. It was sometime in October but not Halloween. We got to the cemetery around 11:30 p.m. and screwed around in the car for a bit before getting out sometime after 12 a.m. We had our phones with us and were using them as torches. We hopped the fence to the cemetery and started to look at all the graves, pointing out the most interesting ones and kind of just screwing around. The place was completely deserted, as cemeteries tend to be at 12 a.m. We walked further and further in and entered a part of the cemetery where the graves were quite a bit larger and much older. By now it had likely been around half an hour. As we were walking down the path, my boyfriend commented that there was a strange smell lingering around, which was extremely weird, as my boyfriend cannot smell at all. He lost his sense of smell due to a bunch of infections and other problems with his ears and sinuses as a child. I don't know the 100% details of the problems, though. I couldn't smell anything, and I have an above normal sense of smell, so we both shrugged the experience off. I was looking at one of the graves some time later when my boyfriend shook my shoulder and pointed at one of the largest graves a few meters into the distance. I'm terrible at knowing where people are pointing, but this time I spotted it right away. It was a little girl, I'd guess around 11 or 12 years old. She had very dark brown or black hair that looked well cared for and quite long. She was sitting on top of the grave with her legs dangling over the edge. At first I saw her wearing a lacy white dress, like a nightgown a rich girl would wear. The dress looked old, but since I'm no expert, I couldn't determine its age. Perhaps it was from the 1900s? But I looked away to look at my boyfriend, and when I looked back again, she was wearing a different dress. All I remember is that it was red because at this point I was super scared. Something about the whole situation felt wrong to me. I felt extremely fearful, and due to the fact ghosts were very normal for me, this was extremely unusual. I'd never felt unsafe seeing a ghost before. It was around this time I noticed that the cemetery was eerily quiet, with no sounds of bats. There are a lot of fruit bats in that area, or any other animals, and the air felt stale and stagnant. We just stood and stared at the little girl for what felt like an eternity, weirdly transfixed, and then we both ran for it up the path at full speed. I turned for a second to see if she was still there, and she was gone completely. Honestly, it made me run faster, and during the entire run back, we were both dead silent. When we were back at our car, we sat there for ages trying to work out what we just saw. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, but since we both had previous paranormal experiences, we knew it had to be a ghost. For a few months afterward I continuously felt like I was being watched and had frequent nightmares about seeing the little girl in our apartment. I always felt uneasy. We eventually moved around 30 minutes away, and the feelings and dreams stopped. I've since tried to research the ghost but haven't turned anything up, though there is a local ghost tour at that cemetery, and the guide might know something. Ever since then my paranormal experiences have been more frequent and have been getting more unsettling. My boyfriend has been experiencing things more frequently as well. My wife and I saw a dark figure at the cemetery. It was my wife's uncle's viewing at a church inside the cemetery. We were already inside the church around 5:30 p.m. when my wife said, "I forgot something inside the car. Can we go get it?" I said, "Okay, let's go." As we were walking towards the parking area, I was looking directly between the back of my car and another car next to mine, and there was a small bush there. Then I saw a small, dark, shadowy figure run across the space between the cars near the bushes in front of the vehicles. My wife tugged on my arm, thinking that she saw the same thing I saw, but she didn't say anything. She went in my car and grabbed her stuff, but as soon as we walked off, that's when my wife said to me, "Did you see that?" And that's when I knew I wasn't seeing things, and I said to my wife, "Yeah, I saw that dark shadow figure run across between the front of the cars by that bush." My wife said, "I thought you didn't see it." What was that? We didn't know what it was, but that was the first time I saw something like that, kind of creepy. I went in a cemetery last night. I was really bored again and decided I wanted to see if I would get an experience at the cemetery at night. I waited until 12, then went, and nothing was happening. At first I was just walking, then my flashlight started to flicker, and I went to go hit it and thought I heard a whisper. I turned around and shined my light on some stone, seeing something go behind it. I started walking to it, and then behind me again I heard a stick being stepped on. I immediately opened my phone and opened an app for a spirit box. I looked at reviews, and people were saying it was actually real and someone heard their name being called. Anyway, I was using the app, and nothing was coming through when previously I tested it, and I was hearing voices. I was hearing nothing but static, so I decided to go in a really dark area where you can't even see the road. I asked if anyone was here and thought I heard my name. I got a little scared and asked again, "I need you to talk again." Then, I heard laughter that sounded like a madman, followed by footsteps around me. I ran into the light, and then nothing but static again. I wasn't experiencing anything after that until I was walking to the exit and saying, "I'm leaving now. Goodbye." And I heard a whisper in my ear say my name, and I ran all the way home, not looking back. My family's farm is basically in ruins since we don't use the land anymore, but it has been in my family for generations. The farmhouse is really old. We've never had bad experiences with ghosts, but there is no doubt that that land is well and truly, thoroughly haunted. Story 1. My great-grandparents lived in it most of the time, and my aunt never met them. She married into the family. She isn't superstitious and thinks ghosts are a whole bunch of bollocks. She's very religious and a very no-nonsense, take-no-bull person. I love her to bits. She was in the kitchen preparing food one day, and she saw this old man walking toward the house through the field and told my uncle that one of the neighbors was here. My uncle goes outside but doesn't find anyone. My aunt gets frustrated and says she literally just saw the guy. My uncle asked her what he looked like, and my aunt described my great-grandfather right down to his awful fashion sense with green pants and a salmon pink jersey. There are no pictures of them out in the open, and the only pictures with them in color are on videotapes. My great-grandfather wore that pink jersey virtually every single day, and my aunt even described his walking cane down to the crooked handle and the dog that followed him. My aunt refuses to believe in ghosts, but she still won't talk about that ghost sighting. She is tight-lipped. My uncle says she is terrified to talk about it. Story 2. My mom once woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't go back to sleep. She was wide awake. She went to the kitchen to get something to eat, and from the kitchen you can see directly into the living room. She's told me that she saw her dad, who died when she was 11, and both of my great-grandfathers in the living room grinning and laughing and having whiskey. She even remembers hearing the ice clinking against glass but acknowledges that she didn't hear them specifically. They turned and saw her, waved, and greeted her. She greeted them back, went into the kitchen, stopped, and finally processed what she'd just seen. They were gone when she turned around. This took place in the northern Cape of South Africa. It's virtually all farmland there. Just remembered another, but this took place here at home. Both my brother and I have seen the exact same man, black with a white shirt and sleeves rolled up, a hat, and suspenders. He's almost monochrome now that I think of it, from the kitchen and looking through the window onto the lawn. It's always there for a second or so, and he's always walking towards the house but not looking at the window. He's never given us a bad vibe. I have also experienced hearing an old woman whisper "hey" from directly under the balcony. I asked my friend if she could do long-distance readings, and she told me, without me telling her, that she's picking up the vibe of a young man, an old man, and a middle-aged/old woman. I only just learned that my opa died on this property before the house was built. It is thoroughly spooky hearing her ghost stories. She's experienced a naughty spirit in her room that used to knock things over but was never malevolent. She still asked it to leave and sage the place. Unexplainable occurrence at cemetery. Hey everyone, I had a really creepy and inexplicable experience yesterday, and I just wanted to come on here and share what happened. I've been into the paranormal since I was a kid and have often visited different cemeteries and historic sites in my area in hopes of catching something in person or in pictures/video. One of my favorite cemeteries to explore is an old one about 15 miles from my house. It's located out in the country about 50 miles outside of Chicago and situated on a steep river bluff. Some history on the cemetery. The first burials took place in the late 1830s and continued all the way up until the 1990s. At some point in the early 1900s, a severe storm caused a lot of the hillside that the cemetery is located on to wash out and ended up disinterring many of the graves. Most were moved to a newer cemetery in the closest town, but some of the graves remained unscathed. As a result, there are only about 30 marked graves in the cemetery on about 2 acres of land that it sits on. As to what happened last night, I was visiting with my aunt and one of her friends in the afternoon, and my aunt had mentioned that she wanted to check out some of the infamous haunted locations in the Chicago area, as she's lived here her whole life and never seen any of them in person. I started telling her about all of the haunted places in the area that I know of and mentioned the cemetery. She and her friend asked if I wanted to go there last night, as it was a nice night and we had no plans. I had been there before at night, so I agreed, and we headed there around 10 p.m. There is no parking lot or even a sign for this cemetery, It's surrounded by an old split-rail wooden fence, and there's about a 20-foot strip of grass between the road and the fence where you can pull off. There was one other car pulled off to the side of the road in front of the cemetery, which I found a little unusual, as it's not well known, and I had never encountered anybody else there at night before. I pulled off the road right next to the other parked car, and we got out. As I got out, I glanced in the car that I parked next to, and there was nobody inside. The moon was full last night, and the car had no tints, so I could clearly see inside it. My aunt and her friend didn't realize how steep of a hill the cemetery was on and decided to just wait down in front of my car along the fence while I went in and explored. Mind you, this entire time they were no more than maybe 15 from the other car that I had parked next to. I started walking around the cemetery by myself and found it unusual that nobody else was in there despite another car being parked at the front. I had just about made it to the top of the hill when I heard my aunt and her friend yelling out for me to get back down to the car and get out of there. I thought maybe they saw a cop coming down the road, so I ran down the hill. By the time I got to the bottom of the hill where my car was parked, my aunt and her friend were already back inside my car. I got in, and my aunt was in the front passenger seat with her eyes covered, and her friend was in the back seat, visibly shaking. When I asked them what was wrong, they said, "Look in the car next to us." I glanced over, and clear as day there were 4 people sitting in the car next to us. 2 women in the front seats and 2 men in the back seats. All probably around 60 to 70 years old and in old-timey clothing. The woman closest to me on the passenger side had dark brown hair tied up in a bun. They were completely motionless, just staring straight ahead into the cemetery. I panicked because I know for a fact that nobody was in that car when we got there, and I got out and glanced inside. And my aunt and her friend were never more than 15 from the other car in the couple minutes that I was in the cemetery, so they definitely would have heard people walking and getting into the car. Something else that didn't add up is that it was only about 43 degrees at the time we went to the cemetery last night, and with 4 people in a car with windows all rolled up, the windows would be fogged up. After seeing the people in the car, I immediately started my car and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. We tried to come up with a rational explanation for what happened, maybe somebody playing a prank on us with blow-up figures, but nothing added up. The people in that car were way too human looking to be any kind of blow-up figurine or prop. Not only that, but as I already said, my aunt and her friend would have seen and heard something going on being that close to the car. This was the most vivid ghost experience I've ever had in my life. I've seen shadow figures, heard voices/whispers, and caught odd things on camera before, but never saw anything as clear as what I saw last night. Followed by a ghost. Back in 2014 when I was a teenager, I was still living in my small hometown in Europe, Bulgaria. My childhood friends and I, consisting of 2 boys and 1 girl, occasionally took walks along a highway that was not frequently used. We usually saw a few trucks pass by, but it was not congested with traffic, and since it was very close to our homes, it became a regular activity for us. There were houses on the left and a big, grassy field with some hills on the right. An old, unused canal from the early 90s was on the right side of the field. The canal was full of trash and sticks, and it was also used to dispose of the bones of farm animals, like goats and sheep. However, there weren't many bones present. Creepy, yeah, but we knew they were from animals. We have visited it before during the daytime, nothing impressive, really, just an empty hole. One ordinary night, we decided to go on another walk along this highway, and we went to the end of it once and then came back, so we got bored since we're always doing the same thing. Someone gave the idea to go along the small dirt road, which is alongside the abandoned canal, and we didn't give it much thought. Note that the highway has streetlights, but the dirt road next to the canal is dark. It was a full moon as far as I remember, since it wasn't pitch black night, and we could see where we were going without using our phones for light. Anyways, we were walking, joking, laughing, and just having a good time, really. One of the boys went ahead of us since he was walking faster. I, the other boy, and the other girl were behind him, walking a bit slower. At the middle of the dirt road, the 3 of us decided to go back to the well-lighted area on the highway and called the other guy to come back as well. A few minutes passed, and the first boy, who was ahead, was almost at the end of the dirt road when he started running towards us, screaming, "Guys, run!" So instinctively, we all turned around to see what was happening, and we just froze. We saw him running very fast toward us, and there was something behind him, following him. Everyone managed to brush it off and run towards the highway, except me. I stood there for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what we were witnessing. It's very hard to describe. It was a figure that was somehow shining bright white light, and it was moving up and down, coming towards us. When I realized I could not understand what I was seeing, I turned my back to the figure and ran so fast that I even passed the others, who had started running before me. We didn't stop until we reached the streetlights, and when we did, we turned around, there was nothing behind us anymore. We were terrified at first, but then we just dropped the subject and never spoke of it again. None of us shared this experience with anyone outside of our childhood group because we feared that people would start rumors suggesting we were using drugs, especially given that it was a very small town. A couple of years went by, we grew up, and everyone started moving out to the bigger cities in the area. So at one point, I was the only person from our childhood group left in our hometown since I was the youngest of us four. This happened in 2017. I was spending time outdoors in my hometown with a different group of friends, who had never been close to my childhood friends at any point. We began discussing various topics casually, and as it grew darker outside, one of the individuals proposed that we share eerie stories. Then he started talking and shared how recently he and 3 other boys were hanging out during the night, alongside the dirt road next to the abandoned canal. At this point I was all ears. He then proceeded to describe how exactly the same thing happened to them, how they were just hanging out there, and then some weird figure, a shining, bright white thing, came towards them. They got scared and ran away, and then when they looked back, the figure had disappeared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw dropped to the ground. Then I shared that a couple of years ago, I and 3 other people experienced the exact same thing in the very same place and asked him if any of these people talked with him about it and if it was some kind of joke, but it wasn't. The story doesn't end exactly here. I went home that night, still stunned, and I barely slept. I kept remembering what happened years ago and trying to figure things out, but I thought of nothing that made sense. What we experienced was just unexplainable. The next day, I decided to share everything with my parents, expecting that they would dismiss my experiences as mere imagination due to fear. However, to my surprise, they both stared at me in horror. I asked them why they were not saying anything and just staring at me, and then they told me how back in the early 90s when they were teenagers themselves, 2 kids went missing, a 7-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. Before they went missing, these kids lived right next door to our apartment, in the house that was facing our balcony. Since it's a small town, everyone thought the kids would be found soon, but 5 years passed without any sign of them. Nobody had heard anything, and there were no suspects in the kidnapping or any leads regarding what happened to them. Then, in the 5th year of their disappearance, their remains were found in the abandoned canal, and the evidence collected there led to the conclusion that they had been ended, but the killer was never found. My parents said that this event shook the community at the time, leading many people to avoid the canal. However, curious teens occasionally visited it and shared stories of unexplainable sightings, but nobody believed them. To this day, when I visit my hometown and pass by the canal, I feel so uneasy, and I just cannot even think about going alongside the dirt road after knowing what really happened there. We were surrounded in a graveyard. So, about a month ago my 2 friends, we'll call them N and K, respectively, and I were going on a night drive, just looking for something to do. We decided to drive up to a graveyard that Kay had told me about earlier. You have to drive down a long road to a dirt road that goes uphill towards the cemetery, then drive through the open entryway. It was an easy drive up, and there was no one there when we showed up. We drove through the whole place and decided to park at the very back corner, where there weren't any graves. We hung out and just talked in the car for maybe 10 minutes when Ann noticed lights bouncing down a hill on the opposite side of the graveyard. I thought nothing of it and assumed it was just a couple of teenagers that also decided to hang out around dead people. Kay started to get a little uneasy, but I told him that the lights were so far away that we'd have plenty of time to leave if we wanted to. Ann joined in with Kay, saying that she was getting a terrible feeling and also wanted to leave. Then a car pulled up. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what kind it was, but I know it was a small 4-door. It rolled up the path on our left with its lights off and parked, blocking one of our exits. That freaked all of us out, and I finally decided it would be best to leave. We drove down a path on our left, and I could hear people talking. I just assumed it was the people with the lights from earlier and thought nothing of it as we drove past a group of people crowded together around a headstone. I told them they were being ridiculous and decided to drive back to our spot, even though I was a little unsettled at this point. So I turned around and drove back up. The car was gone, and so were the people that I had just passed. We all decided it was time to go at that point. At first, I had just brushed it off as a weird encounter with other people. But recently I've been thinking about it, and I didn't hear a car door open once, or anyone drive away. Maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion, but it still confuses me. Thoughts? The angry groundskeeper of the old cemetery. I'd like to share a pretty scary experience I had a few years back. I recently spoke with a friend, which reminded me of the experience. I live in a coastal village, and a few hundred meters away is a psychiatric institute. This certainly isn't anything like you'd see in horror movies, it's actually quite the opposite. The mindset/method behind the institute is openness, freedom, and interaction with the normal people non-patients of the village. The institute is in the middle of a beautiful nature reserve, with lots of green and nature everywhere, and to stimulate interaction with the outside world, people are free to visit, speak with the patients, and walk through the woods that surround the institute. I live just a few hundred meters away from the forest. I quite often visit the grounds of the institute and take a long hike through the forest. The institute is quite old, about 300 years. There is a small cemetery along the route I take for the patients who died at the institute. I found headstones going back to 1840. It is quite a nice cemetery. It is almost circular with a weeping willow in the middle, a circular path around the tree, and 4 paths in the form of a cross leading away from the center. There are old headstones scattered around. I lived just about my whole life in this village. I was raised here, and I still live here now that I found my apartment. My mother told me that all those graves were emptied years ago because people were no longer allowed to be buried on the grounds of the institute. I usually avoid cemeteries at all costs because they freak me out, too many horror movies. But because of what my mother told me, I felt at ease enough to walk around and check it out. I am always very fascinated by history and old things, so trying to decipher the old headstones was quite a lot of fun for me. So about 2 years ago I was again taking a walk through the forest, and I came by my favorite cemetery. I walked past the headstones. Many are unmarked graves because the families didn't want it to be known that they had a family member in a mental institute. I even found the grave of the first director of the institute back in 1842, who was apparently buried here. I sat down on one of the benches, which are on the outermost circular path of the cemetery, just to relax and enjoy the warm sun on my face. After about 15 minutes of enjoying the view and browsing on my phone, I decided to continue my walk. I was slowly making my way back to the forest trail, checking out a few more headstones and saying hello to the weeping willow when I suddenly felt a strange pushing feeling on my back. It wasn't a physical push, more like a push against my aura, for lack of a better description. It is like the feeling you have when someone is right behind you in your personal space and you can actually feel them. Like your bubble being pushed and dented. At first I didn't really pay attention to it, but at a certain point I became consciously aware of it because it began to irritate me. Instinctively I turned around, but I didn't see anything. It did scare me a bit, so I stopped checking out the headstones and just kept walking. It was a very nice, warm, sunny day, so I would rather not rush, and I kept walking slowly. At a certain point I felt a really hard push. Again, not physically, but energetically, against my aura. It wasn't just the push itself that scared me, it was more the feeling/emotion I felt behind the push. There was so much aggression behind it. I felt really threatened. I turned around, and this time I did see something. Again, I did not actually see it physically before me, but I did see something, not with my real sight, I guess with my third eye or something. It was energetically there. It is really hard to find the right words for it. I think people who can see energy and auras can understand what I mean. What I saw was an old man. Very, very old, he looked very thin, his cheeks were hollow, and he looked very unhealthy. He was bald with just a bit of hair to the sides. Wrinkles everywhere. In a way he reminded me of a real-life version of Eustace from the cartoon Courage the Cowardly Dog. He too wore a light green overall, which was worn and torn, and he had a white yellowish shirt under that. The scariest part was that I couldn't really see his eyes. They looked like 2 white hollow spots instead of eyeballs. Despite that his expression was quite clear, he was really angry with me, and there was a lot of hate and anger coming from his eyes. I somehow got the impression he was the old groundskeeper, and he wanted me gone. I have no idea where I got that from, although I could see him sort of, as in my third eye, there was a kind of haze between me and him. He didn't have the regular human skin tone, he was gray and bluish, almost transparent, I guess, but I couldn't really see through him. Again, I'm struggling to describe this, I don't think the right words exist in the English language. He pushed me again, and this time I did actually see him do it. He pushed me against my shoulders, and he seemed to have a lot of strength even though I was a lot taller than him. The strange thing was this time I actually stumbled backwards a bit, just a step. It was very clearly not physical again, but I think because I saw him push, I unconsciously reacted, and my body thought I should stumble. Kind of weird. At this point, I felt really threatened. I had absolute certainty that he wanted to kill me, and he wanted me off his grounds. I noticed someone standing behind him, over his right shoulder about 3 meters away, with the same strange gray/bluish color. It was an old woman. She had the same sickly appearance as he did. She was wearing an old Dutch traditional dress like they used to wear about 200 years ago. It looked old and dirty, but I could make out quite a few details. She also had a very furious expression. She was standing with her hands on her sides. She gave me the impression she was supporting his actions. I got the impression she was his wife. After this last push I got totally freaked out. I noticed he had a pitchfork in his right hand and decided to get the hell out of there. I turned around and quickly started walking away out of the cemetery. Right away, I kept getting that pushing feeling, but this time it was farther away. I was certain he was right behind me, but when I looked around, I didn't see him. This time I was petrified. Being chased was way scarier. For some reason I didn't run, I have no idea why. I just kept walking quickly, and I made a beeline for home. The entire time I had the feeling he was walking behind me even after I left the Institute's grounds and when I got to my apartment. I called a good friend who was into spiritual stuff, and he gave me some advice about how to visualize shielding around your house. It sure helped, at least it made me feel better. A week ago I visited an old friend of mine. He is an old gentleman and a former psychiatrist who worked at the Institute 30 years ago. He's a great fan of history and knows much about the local area. The psychiatric buildings were in the process of being demolished, and the subject of the cemetery came up. Of course I didn't say anything about my experience, but I did mention how I knew the graves were empty. He looked at me funny, and he said that wasn't true. They stopped burying people there in 1950, but their graves were still full. If the graves were truly empty, they would have also removed the headstones. This truly sends a chill down my back. Unfortunately, I have no way of providing any of this. At least it makes me feel a lot better by sharing this. Thank you for listening. What tried to kill me that day? I'm a female, and this story happened just a year ago on the day I'm sharing this. For reference, I would be 15 at this time and deep into the paranormal. I am a medium and have always seen spirits from a young age, and I believe I was given this ability when I was about 3. I experienced a brief period of clinical death and was subsequently revived. During my childhood, I suffered from severe illness, and the medical professionals were unable to determine its cause. Ever since then, my parents recall me talking about children or adults who were never actually present, and they thought it was just my imagination. However, as I grew older and continued to see them, I realized that it was not merely in my head. I understand that many individuals are skeptical of mediums, but I genuinely perceive people who are not physically present. The night before this story, I had a dream of an older woman coming in and telling me to wake up many, many times. I used to experience sleep paralysis, and I believed that was the cause until she asked me to wake up while the gas was still on. This caused me to wake up in a panic and go into the kitchen to find not one but all of our gas stoves on. This was the first time I had seen her, and it hasn't been the last. I think of her as my guardian. The next day, my friends and I planned to explore an abandoned tax building. As we were all big fans of Sam and Colby, we wanted to see what all the fun was about, and now, deep down, I regret every decision made that day. As we were going, we intended to stay all day, so we packed food, water, chargers, flashlights, everything you would need, basically, and our parents thought we were sleeping at a different friend's house. They always covered for us, as we were going to hopefully stay the night. As we made our way towards the building, my friends were Googling its history, and we soon found out it was forced to close due to one guy killing a coworker and assaulting her in front of his colleagues. Not only did he kill one, but he also ended 4 others, 5 total. We all became freaked out but didn't want to chicken out and knew the only thing we were risking was the chance of squatters. As we entered the building, I felt as if the air in my lungs was being squeezed out of me while everyone else was fine. It was almost as if whatever was there knew that I was the only one who could sense them and see them. As we explored for about an hour, we heard the usual building noises until I suddenly heard a scream that sounded like a bloody murder scream from a woman. I remember asking my 2 guy friends I was with at the time if they heard it, and they both said no, so we continued exploring. After being there for about 3 hours, I decided to wander off alone, knowing I had seen a ghostly figure of a woman and seen her enter a room. As I went into the one room alone, that's when I saw something move. I assumed it was the woman at the time. The next thing I saw was blood on the walls and floor. It was dry in some places and wet in others. This confused me, as the incidents were years ago, meaning something else happened here. As I stood up, I saw the thing move again. I called it out, saying I could see it, and I was willing to talk. The next thing I knew, I was pushed against a wall and felt like I was being choked, but nothing was there. Soon, my friends came running in and saw this, and they all started screaming. We decided to leave, but before we left, I saw a little boy and went over to speak to him, thinking he was an actual child. My friends were confused and were calling out to me, but I continued as I spoke to this little boy. He said my presence being there had angered him. I was confused about who him was and why I was unable to see him, but I could see the others that haunted this place. We decided it was unsafe to stay as I explained everything that had happened. The same night we ended up really sleeping over at her house, and that night I felt as if something attached itself to me. The night I didn't sleep and only woke up to a mirror and bruises in the shape of handprints on my neck. I googled how the man ended the woman, and it was from none other than strangulation. It's not who did I see, it's what did I see. Ever since that night, more paranormal things have been happening to me, and I'm always willing to share those stories, but I believe whatever was there wanted me dead, as it knew I could sense it there and the others couldn't, and it was afraid I would be able to tell the truth about what really happened that day. I hope you enjoyed this, and I know something is attached to me now, as I have spoken to it, and it is unable to leave me alone. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, and I have much more to talk about. Thank you. My trip to an Indian graveyard. My fiancé has experienced numerous paranormal events throughout his life, which have left him terrified. First, I want to share one experience we had together. Last Thursday night we were driving around looking for something to do around 11 o'clock. Our friend Sierra called us and asked if we wanted to meet her and her new boyfriend at a diner in town. We got there, had some pies, and decided we should all do something. None of us had work Friday, so we were going to hit the bars. My fiancé and I went to grab another friend of ours who wanted to come. After we got him, we all met back up at the 7-Eleven. It turned out that all of the bars were empty, so we were brainstorming what to do instead. That's when Sierra suggested we go to the cemetery. We live in a city at the end of the Oregon Trail. In what used to be the outskirts of the city is a little park. The park is located at the top of a large cliff. Also about a mile from the parking lot is a cemetery you can only get to by walking. The cemetery used to be an Indian graveyard, but over time they would put the people who lived in the city in the graveyard too. Also, settlers used to chase Indians off of the cliff in droves. And many people of Indian descent have ended themselves off of the cliff. Honestly, the whole place has a creepy vibe to it even during the day. Anyway, my fiancé was really against it, but the group talked him into just going to the park. We get there around 1 a.m., and we are standing at the top of the cliff, which overlooks the city. Everything is okay for a while, but then my fiancé quiets everyone down, and I swear to God we both heard footsteps to our left. Our whole group was to our right. We freaked out and made the whole group leave. As we were leaving, I looked at my fiancé, and something to our left caught my eye. It was a bright ball. It came up from the top of the trees, made an arch, and came back down. It wasn't like transparent like a flashlight, it was solid, like if the moon were really far off in the distance but still really bright and white. I even thought it was the moon for a second, but then I looked up and saw the moon big and full and red from the smoke from fires all over the state. Later in the car I asked my fiancé and our friend we picked up if they'd seen it too. They had, so I wasn't going crazy for a second. There was actually something there. As we got to the car, my fiancé looked behind us and swears he saw another white orb thing in the forest. But it couldn't have been a lamp or something because we were at the edge of the city, and there weren't houses for miles that way. Also, there were no other cars in the parking lot, so it couldn't have been another person. Anyway, we drove out of there as fast as we could on that ancient one-lane road. We dropped off our friend, and he had me drive his car because he was too freaked out. By the time I drove myself home, he seemed fine. Looking back, I really wish I had just spent the night with him. That night after he dropped me off, everything was fine for a while, but once he started driving around the back roads near his house, weird things began to happen. He listens to music on Pandora while driving. Well, mid-song the track somehow skipped from Tiny Dancer to Dance with the Devil. Then something black ran in front of him, probably a cat or small dog, he said. He slammed on the brakes so as not to hit it. He looked behind him in the mirror to make sure there wasn't someone driving behind. That's when he saw a pair of eyes and a dark outline of a person in his back seat. Then the song changed back to Tiny Dancer, and the figure was gone. He parked the car in his driveway and ran inside in a full-on panic. Nothing else happened that night, but he was a bag of nerves for days. I am uncertain about the significance of those events or whether that entity is still following him. I just know it freaked us out really badly, and we don't want to go back to that park ever again. If you guys know anything, I'd actually really like the help. My friend had a close encounter with a strange creature. For about 10 years, my friend had a close encounter with a creature who looked similar to a skinwalker. The action takes place in Poland in the town of Staso. I know it was already night, and my friend and another friend were returning from the campfire on the motorbike. When they arrived at the cemetery, at some point, my friend saw the creature that followed them behind the cemetery wall. Apparently, the boy ran very fast. When the other colleague saw her, he started shouting loudly and panicked, which caused him to lose control of the motor, leading them to the meadow across the street. Then my friend looked at this creature, and she stood and looked at him. A friend claims that he felt as if this creature was laughing at them for being scared. He said that he felt it as she looked at him and then hid behind the wall. Of course, the guys ran away in panic, leaving the motor in the meadow. According to my friend's description, this creature was about 7 meters tall, with a big white face and black eyes. He also mentioned that the creature had a neck that resembled the shape of a suit, but he believed it was actually part of its body. The creature had very long hands reaching to the ground, and when it ran behind them, its hands were loose. He also said something about the extra photo in his legs. A colleague was then afraid to walk that way for 3 years. What do you think about it? Disturbing experience in a graveyard. In 2003, I used to receive email chains filled with strange and old pictures purporting to depict ghosts. I've never seen that before, so I was both scared and curiously attracted at the same time. I did a search on the web to find out how to try to take some ghost pictures by myself, and I found a blog that gave me some advice. So, one day, I decided to ask my stepfather to lend me a digital camera. It was a Friday evening. We were in March or April. My friends and I used to hang out in a castle that belongs to the municipality. Yes, that town was awesome and that part of my life was priceless, where lots of kids from the town used to play music or just chill and play games with the community workers. It was around 10 p.m. I was with one good friend, and on our way to come back home, we had to walk past the town graveyard. I told him I wanted to try to take some ghost pictures tonight, and he was okay to come with me. In front of the graveyard we met my little brother and 4 friends of his. They were coming back home too, and they were chatting on a bench. They asked us what we were doing, and I decided to tell them the truth. They were very enthusiastic, and they asked me if they could come with us. This idea didn't please me very much, but I said yes on one condition: they had to follow my instructions. They were all okay, and I told them that when we're inside the graveyard, we all have to be quiet, respectful, and aware of every strange feeling we could have. If someone feels something, just make me a sign and show me the direction so I can take a picture with the camera flash on. Then we all passed over the barrier and began to walk through the graveyard. The graveyard was divided into 2 parts, one old and creepy and one recent and pretty normal. I decided to go to the old part because there were a lot of statues and paths surrounded by large fir trees. It was creepy by itself. We walked between the graves, through the paths. Everything around us was very scary. But, after a while and some random pictures, nobody felt anything weird. So we decided to return to the newer section of the graveyard to exit and head home. On our way to the barrier, we were more relaxed and started to chat quietly and laugh a little bit. The pressure had faded away. We were walking with new graves on our left side when something very strange happened. My brother turned to me. He was white as a sheet, and tears were running down his cheeks. He said, "Take a picture. She is right there." I was confused, and I took a picture as fast as I could in the direction he showed me. After that, nobody said a word until we got out of the graveyard. Everybody was stunned and frightened. When we were out, we started to talk. My brother said he didn't know what happened. He did not see anything, but he had a very powerful feeling that there was a woman just right where he showed me, and that the feeling was so strange that some tears began to fall. We said goodnight to his friends, and we came back to our house with my brother and my friend. Once we got home, we wanted to see the pictures, so I connected the camera to my computer. My mother and my stepfather were still awake, so they came to see the pictures too. The first pictures were just some statues and old graves, and there was nothing interesting. The only curious thing was the last picture, the picture my brother asked me to take. It was a new grave, with a lot of flowers on it, but behind that grave there was something unusual. There was a white shape, not like a light or something. It was made of thick white smoke but rich in details. We could see a woman who appeared to be small or on her knees. She was wearing a large dress, had long hair, and her head was down, with her hair hiding half of her face. We all saw her in the picture at the same time, and we were shocked and scared. Except for my stepfather, who immediately said that this was a prank and started to laugh. We could all see the woman. There was every detail, like a normal person, but made of thin and dense smoke. He could see her too, but he didn't want to admit that a thing like that could be possible. After that, I saved the picture on a floppy disk. Remember, 2003, we talked and tried to change our minds, and after a while my friend went back to his house and everyone was going to bed. It was one of the worst nights I've ever had. I was sweating, shaking, and thinking about the woman in the picture. I know it was only in my head, but I'm pretty sure that between 2 dreams I felt something trying to pull my blanket. Anyway, I don't think this detail is important. I was just scared. The next day, I took the floppy disk and decided to show the picture to everyone in the castle. So I came out of the house, and on my way to the castle, I went in front of the graveyard. This time it was daylight, and my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I had to know who was on that grave. So I walked into the graveyard, I found the grave, and it was a man. Apparently he was a football coach. So I checked the graves next to his, the place where the woman stood. It was a baby, he died at less than 1 year old. So I was a little bit confused, and I went to the next grave. And then there was the creepiest thing. It was the spirit of a woman who had died the year before. Everyone in town knew her story because it was one of the most traumatic facts that happened last year. She was in the car with her husband and her daughter. The father was driving on a little road next to my town. On the side of the road, he pulled the car over. I don't know why, but the woman got out of the car. Maybe he wanted her to drive the car, so she walked around the car, but it was parked in a sharp bend a little way down the top of a hill. Some young guys who were driving way too fast didn't see her. She was instantly hit and cut in half before the eyes of her family. Horrible story, that's why everyone knew her. It was chilling. I came out of the graveyard faster than I came in, with lots of scenarios in my head. I finally went to the castle and showed the picture to the guys who were near the computer and didn't say anything. Everyone saw the woman, but they all reacted like my stepfather. They started to laugh and said that it was a fake picture, that it was a prank. I didn't mind. The fact that they all saw the woman in the picture proves that something is there, whatever it may be. I kept showing the picture to everyone I know. Only a few people believed me, but they all saw a woman too. Only my friend, my brother, and his friends know what really happened that night, the real circumstances of the picture, my brother, and the tears. This is one of the most disturbing parts of the story. I understand that you all want to see the picture, and I also want to show it to you, but back in 2003, when I shared the picture using my floppy disk, I lent it to an ex-girlfriend so she could show it to her family, and she never returned it to me. I regret not being able to show this picture to everyone, as it was the most accurate ghost or spirit picture I've ever seen, especially if you know what happened just before with my brother and who was in the graves where the shape was. Since then, I've believed that some things are inexplicable. Whatever it is, it's real. This story keeps haunting me 18 years later. If anyone had seen or lived anything like that, please let me know. Thank you for listening. Experience in a cemetery. So the other night my boyfriend, daughter, 4, and I were walking in the cemetery a few blocks from our house. We drove because we wanted maximum walking time with a toddler. We planned to play Pokemon Go. We entered through the main entrance, and after a few steps, I started feeling nauseous and worried. Anxious. I didn't know why, I just ignored it. We wanted to check out the huge headstones toward the middle, so we headed that way. We notice a car parked with its lights off, no front license plate, passenger and back doors wide open, and the man is halfway in the back seat. He's parked on one side of the big headstones, which ended up being priests. Monsignor and such. We walked through, and the guy noticed us. He closed the open doors, then went around to the driver's side and got in the car. Sat there and just watched us. So we veered away from him and went down a different path. My daughter all of a sudden says, "They're so loud." Me, who? Daughter, the rocks. They're talking to me. My mouth drops open. We didn't tell her anything about the cemetery or headstones. She has no idea what they are other than big rocks. We ended up leaving, and as soon as we drove away, my nausea eased up. I told my boyfriend that I was feeling sick, and he became very anxious and explained EMF to me, which I found creepy. We went to the store and passed the cemetery on the way home again. His car was still there. He left after we pulled down our street we lived on. We've had one other paranormal experience with her before, which I will share. This was the second time that I confirmed for myself the existence of the afterlife, ghosts, and spirits. Later that night she was talking about the rocks again and said they were watching us. I said, "What did they look like?" She said, "Shadows." She said they looked like this. And then proceeded to make a worried expression. They told me they couldn't walk with us and had to stay by the rocks. Are the spirits warning us about that man? Or are there maybe some not so good spirits at that cemetery? It must have been real if we both saw it, right? The location of my experience was out at my grandfather's house. He lived and worked at the same place. He and my grandmother lived out in the middle of BFE. There was no sign of life for miles and miles. The closest fire department, if the house or the work warehouse were to spark a little flame, was at least an hour out from normal civilization. Calling for help wasn't going to get you much of anything but a sore throat and a sweet whelp from a nice whooping for screaming like a damn banshee. From time to time you could catch a car flying by doing 100 miles per hour easy. Most of these people were making their way to Sin City. It was a shortcut most people out in town would take to cut at least 3 to 4 hours off their travels. If you were new to that route, then you wouldn't know that there was a very sharp turn before a turnoff to get to my grandparents' property. Several major accidents had occurred at that location. They'd hit the curve at over 100 miles per hour, flipping their car into a ditch just after the turnoff. Going that fast, I suppose you would miss that giant sign a mile before the curve telling you to slow down. But, then again, what do I know? I myself had seen a red car overturn into that ditch one time from afar. I was in the front yard playing and was yanked into the house by my grandmother as she yelled for my grandfather to help those people. Sad to say, they didn't make it. Emergency response took 2 hours to get there, and the coroners took a few more after that. It was horrible. At night, if you happened to wander past the property gate, it got pitch black. There was one light that lit the massive gate in front of the house. If you walked far enough down the dirt turnoff, you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. So, we would take flashlights and dare to explore, trying to be careful not to come across coyotes and rattlesnakes. Most of the time when we would venture off, one of our parental units would trail behind, pretending to spook us by claiming to see something in the far distance. Gullible and naive, we would always look in that direction and get jump scared by them behind us. Go figure. Rolls eyes, don't judge me. So, one night, my cousin and I decided we were both bored out of our tiny little minds and wanted to go for a walk since counting sheep just wasn't cutting it for us. We both quietly crept out the front creaky screen door and toward the huge massive gate in front of the house. Not sure why we decided this at the latest time of the night, but it happened. It was padlocked shut. Nice thick chain around the gate with a giant lock. Determined to get out, we managed to pull the gate open enough to squeeze out and onto the other side. There we both stood accomplished. Looking around, there was enough light to get us not even halfway down the dirt turnoff before it was black. I remember looking around for the moon. On some nights it would light up the sky, and it was a dim kind of dark. Like the desert would have a soft glow. But, that wasn't the case this night. Using our flashlights, we start our late-hour stroll down the dirt turnoff. This turnoff was probably, I'd say, maybe, a mile long. Nothing but a dirt road. Lots of rocks to kick up while dragging my feet. We passed the part of the road where the light ended. Now our lifelines depended on these battery-operated lights. Not seeming to have a care in the world other than our family waking and finding us outside the gate. My cousin and I chatter on about normal teenage crap. Then we see in the distance a light coming up the long stretch of road. We both seem to be seeing the same light, as we both mutter, "Oh, look, a car?" The light is coming towards us. Getting larger and larger the closer it gets. We both stayed planted in the same spot, just watching as the light got closer. As we stood there watching, I thought, how fast could they possibly be going for those headlights to be coming at us so quickly on such a long stretch of road? It was literally like we saw a speck of light turn into two headlights in a matter of a few minutes, if at all. We're about halfway down the dirt road at this point. Still watching these lights coming towards us. A small red 4-door compact car is midway into that turn. I'm pretty sure we're both holding our breath. I'm hoping, even praying, they make this turn. And they didn't. My cousin and I both watch as this car misses this turn and flips, then rolls into that ditch. Where I had seen the other car wreck before. She and I both gasped in disbelief at what we saw. We run towards the accident. The closer we got, I could hear a woman's loud scream for help and a small baby crying in agony. I'm still rushing towards this car when I start seeing smoke coming from the ditch. I'm panicking, wondering how I'm going to help these people. Blinker lights I could see at the corner of the ditch wall as I got closer but still couldn't see the car yet. Then we get to the ditch. My cousin and I stop dead in our tracks as we reach the edge of the deep ditch. We both look down and see that there is nothing there. Nothing. How? We just saw this car wreck, heard screams and cries, and saw lights and smoke. Where did they go? Cars and people just don't vanish out of thin air. Completely confused and trying to wrap my brain around what just happened. I ask my cousin. You saw what I saw, right? Like, I'm not imagining this on my own. It was real, wasn't it? She couldn't even utter a single word. The next day, I walked down to the ditch during broad daylight and by myself. I wanted to make sure it wasn't all in my head. It was too real to not be. I smelled the smoke. He heard the sounds. Saw it all. When I reached the ditch, I noticed tire marks on the curve of the turn, and when I looked down into the ditch, I saw red debris from the car. But was it from that accident we experienced the night before, or could it have been from the one my grandfather helped with? Thinking about it to this day, I feel it was that woman and her baby showing my cousin and me what had happened to them. We wanted to stay and see what was going on when the accident happened but were pulled into the house to keep us safe. I still hear those screams, those baby cries, and I can't get those images of that wreck out of my head. It's like it replays in my mind over and over again. It seems so real not to be. I had asked my cousin many years after if she remembered that night, and she took off crying. The cemetery and what I've seen in my life, whether you believe it or not, is up to you. Today I want to tell you about my encounter with a giant shadow. I want to find other people who have encountered something similar. The story of the shadow in the cemetery. It was winter outside, and I was 16 years old. That night, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the moon was so bright that even without a flashlight, everything was perfectly visible. After training, which ended late in the evening, at 9 p.m., my friend, who was terrified of the dark, asked me to walk him home. Since it was on my way, I agreed. So, we reached his house and said goodbye. Near his house, I had to choose the way home. I was lazy, so I took the shortest route. This was a fatal mistake, because the road was located between two clusters of cemeteries. Just so you understand. There's a cemetery with 5,000 of them on one side and 2,000 on the other. They're about 300 yards apart, and this damn road I took runs between them. Muslim cemeteries are similar to Christian ones, but ours are surrounded by 6-foot-high brick walls. Some of these cemeteries have trees growing in them. There's one cemetery that looks like a 20-foot pyramid. I continue, I walk along the road, on both sides of the cemetery. I catch myself thinking I see something jumping from shadow to shadow between the cemeteries. I start to convince myself it's just my imagination. I walk slowly, constantly looking back. At some point, my attention is drawn to a tree in the middle of a square cemetery. Next to it stands a tall cemetery shaped like a pyramid. I can't figure out what's wrong with this tree. I start looking at the other trees, looking for differences. At some point, I find a difference. Leaves, damn it, this tree has leaves on its branches. Other trees don't have leaves, you can see through them, but this one does. In our area, there are no trees with leaves in winter. I walk on, pondering and trying to explain the logic of this tree, and at the same time, I can't take my eyes off it. At some point, I realize the leaves have become too thick, and it's no longer a tree but a huge shadow that resembles a tree. I didn't notice how this damn tree turned into a 20-foot shadow and how its shadow merged with the shadow of the pyramid-shaped cemetery. I look at it and realize that this is reality. My steps slow, and, looking into the shadow, I pray that its base will end up in the shadow of the pyramid. My fears turned out to be true. The base of the shadow is between me and the pyramid. The distance between me and the pyramid is about 3 school buses. This shadow lies in an empty field, and there are no objects nearby that could cast it. Imagine a place with nothing, add snow, and in the middle, a shadow as tall as a 3-story building. At that moment, I realized that my body was about to enter a state similar to sleep paralysis. The body does not move, only the eyes can look around. You can't speak, you just observe the world around you. At that moment, I was incredibly curious about what would happen if I took a few more steps towards this shadow, and at the same time, I was afraid that it would drag me away and tear me to pieces. Fear of death overcame my curiosity, and without taking my eyes off the shadow, I found the strength to stand up and take a step back, then another, and another. The further I moved from the shadow, the easier it became. I managed to regain control of my body and leave this place. I want to say, if you see a shadow and feel hypnotized or similarly affected, leave immediately. It's hard to explain. Up until a certain point, I wasn't afraid but rather curious. I was simply able to assess the situation objectively, and that's what saved me. Fear of death is definitely the feeling that keeps you from dying, and I advise you to listen to it. Drugs and ghosts. This is my unusual potential encounter with the paranormal. Me and my buddy were hanging, and we wanted to smoke some weed. He said he knew a spot, and it was at a cemetery. There was a large man-made pond there, and very few people were occasionally bird watching or getting some fresh air. It was a nice spot. Stereotypically, it was around 4:20. We smoked a joint coated in keef. It was delightful, a sativa if I recall accurately. Well, we got uber high, and we decided to walk around this park/cemetery. It was a nice walk and an enjoyable day. There were other people there doing their thing. It was chill and relatively pretty empty. As we were walking down this path, I saw a crowd of people just standing around, hanging out. I thought it was just people visiting loved ones or having informal get-togethers, but it was odd because they were just standing around, and I felt uneasy because I thought they were staring at us. I saw their pets hanging around, playing, but as we got closer, they got fuzzy. It was as if their bodies were losing detail and becoming less defined. As we kept moving forward, they turned into gravestones. I was observing gravestones, not individuals. However, it was unmistakably apparent just moments earlier that they resembled people. Yet, suddenly, They transformed into gravestones. I had to do double and triple takes just because I was so flabbergasted. The detail is what strikes me. I could tell what they were wearing. I saw their features, mind you, from a distance, but a person at a distance you can recognize as a person. And it was a whole crowd too, lol, but yeah, it was just gravestones. That experience was interesting, but I should note that I was high at the time. I think they're fun little stories, even if they're probably just high daydreams. It's still fun. I haven't seen any ghosts since high or sober, but thanks for listening. Transparent things, shadow creatures, and weird noises. I live in Scotland, so it's rare to get a good warm day, and this was a warm day in the summer, so hot you needed a drink. I and my friend were walking in the woods, and the trees were green with the sun shining bright, and we were on an adventure. I think I was around 15 or 16 at the time, and my friend and I had the idea to cross a bridge that spans a river in our town to explore the path that goes under the other side of the viaduct, an old stone railway bridge in our town. While walking, we came across one of the bridge's supports, where we found an old mattress and various pieces of junk lying around. After observing it, we resumed our walk, and I experienced an overwhelming urge to turn back, the reason for which I cannot explain. It was just one of those times where your body looks somewhere, and I saw this thing. It didn't have a distinct shape. To accurately describe it, I would say it resembled a large black trash bag, but it was also transparent, allowing me to see through it, even though it appeared dark and foggy. Even though I could see the trees behind it, it slowly drifted to the right and faded away as it did. I was captivated by it for about 2 seconds, but standing there, it seemed like 5. I then turned around and asked my friend, and he had somehow not seen it, as he was looking in front of us and not behind us. I think I will always remember this because it's the only time I actually witnessed something for a good amount of time. My second story is about shadow people/creatures. My dad was out of the country. I remember I saw something running in my kitchen towards the back door, so I decided to investigate. I was curious and for some reason not scared, so I went and looked, and nothing was there. It was strange, but then a couple of days later I was going to stay at my friend's house, and he lives at the bottom of a hill and I live at the top, so we agreed to meet halfway. We met up and were walking to his house when we suddenly stopped. I was like, "Whoa, did you see that?" And he looked at me and said, "Yeah, but I would rather not seem like I was being stupid," and we both just sort of described it at the same time. We saw it run down past a fence and behind a nursery. It looked like a small, skinny man, like the height of a small dog, maybe taller, and it had an arched back, and the way it ran reminded me of a goblin. Every time I see the Hobgoblin Ale, it reminds me of it. My friend then told me a story that before he had started walking up the hill, he had been talking to his ma about something, and he saw it behind her and was really confused by it. We were freaked out, but we decided to call it Bob just because in our logic it was funny, not scary. That night, we went for a walk in the woods, and it was so dark that we couldn't see anything. However, when we emerged from the trees, we noticed that the clouds had formed a skull. It was overall just a strange night. I've only seen shadow people once since then, and that was a few months ago when I saw something run through a car park at the side of my eye. My third story is 2 smaller stories, but I'll just tell them. One time I was in my house with my sister, and we were going to run to the store and get some soda, and the house was empty, and we heard a bang from upstairs. We heard a bang like a drawer being opened and closed quickly, so we went to check my dad's room, but no one was there. We were about to leave when we heard it again, louder than before. We ran upstairs and searched the house, but no one was there. The other story is one I remember well because it happened twice in my mom's house, where I used to live. On my birthday, I remember when people had gone to bed, I would hear a sound outside like a chain dragging across the ground despite no one being there, and I would hear people walking on my stairs even though the only people in the house were sleeping and my dad was at work. I vividly recall it all, every detail, what I was wearing, playing Gears of War 2, conversing with my friend, the weather conditions, the vehicles parked outside, and the ambient sounds. Some friends of mine and I used to hang out after school in the cemetery across from my high school. At that time, my girlfriend and I would cut through the cemetery whenever I walked her home. We usually stopped for teenage shenanigans. Despite spending a significant amount of time there, we experienced only 2 truly unusual incidents. First, there was this bench-shaped family marker, Acker, if memory served, surrounded by smaller personal markers. We used to hang out there, sitting on it, in the grass around it. We were generally pretty respectful, sticking to the road in front of the markers for tossing footballs or horseplay. Directly across said road, there was a mausoleum, and one afternoon I was sitting with my back to its door, watching my friends toss a shoe around like a football. Don't ask, we were nerds. From the other side of the door, something started banging. It was loud enough to vibrate the door, but the noise was not coming directly from it. Then it stopped, and I never heard anything like that again there. Second, the girl I dated through high school was a witch. Specifically, she was the type of witch associated with Silver Raven Wolf and Scott Cunningham. After reading through some new book or another, she was doing her level best to convince me I needed to work a spell to find out my totem. We were walking through the same graveyard as above, sometime in early fall. At one point, I realized every tree nearby, every single one, was full of crows. All we could hear was the soft croaking sound made by flocks of corvids when they are feeling relaxed. I said something like, "I don't need to find a totem, it looks like my totem found me," and that was that. A fun synchronicity, but not super rare. Crows love to hang out in that cemetery, but it did save me from further totem-based peer pressure. This place was once a cemetery. I've realized that I'm spiritually sensitive, and whenever my parents would drive by a cemetery or funeral home, I'd get chills and not want to be nearby. I think it would be due to most of my dad's side of the family being shamans and my own personal experiences. My college class was doing a volunteering field trip in a way to this place that was being converted into an outdoor garden or greenhouse, I'm not sure. When we first arrived, I got a small chill but didn't think much of it because our instructor was dividing us up into groups and telling us to follow the person who was leading the project. The feeling didn't become bad until maybe an hour of being there, and that's when I started feeling full cold chills running throughout my entire body like I was standing inside a restaurant freezer. I'll also mention it was a very hot summer day, around 90 degrees that day, and we were told to drink water. It got to the point where I was starting to feel very lightheaded and getting very dizzy, so I went over to my instructor and told her that I wasn't feeling well. She told me to go and sit in the shade by the canopy that the project leader set up. I did just that, and while sitting there I couldn't shake off the chills until we went to have lunch at the picnic tables across the street from the location. As soon as we stepped off the location, the chills went away, and I was back to normal again. Sadly, after we finished lunch, we stayed for another hour and a half, maybe longer, and the chilling feeling came back again, but instead of just chills, it felt like a hand was now gripping the back of my neck like an owner holding their dog's loose fur to keep them from running off. Again, I told my instructor, and she told me to stay at the canopy because my face was actually becoming pale. She was becoming worried and didn't want me passing out from heat stroke, which I once nearly passed out from and had told her ahead of time. She kept coming back to check on me and going back to volunteering. After a while they finally finished, and I joined up with them. While the project leader was thanking us, I remember feeling like someone was watching me, and when I looked around, nobody was nearby. I started rubbing my arms to try to make the cold feeling go away, and my instructor probably noticed, and we left the place. As we were walking away, my classmate mentioned that this place was once a cemetery, and he didn't know if the bodies were moved or not. I was upset that he had not mentioned this fact until now, despite my previous mention of it, and our instructor apologized, as she was unaware of it herself. The most haunted house in town. I love haunted walks. I've been on at least 6 or 7 that immediately come to mind. I've also mentioned before that I come from a long line of, let's say, paranormal sensitive women, so I've been experiencing the unexplained my entire life. Not constantly, but often enough that, hey, it happens. So, when I go on a haunted walk, usually the people I'm with are watching me as much as they're watching the dark corners of the room. Anyways, back to the story. A few years ago I used to run a hotel. It was a vintage building that had been around since the 1800s, but I'm sad to report that nothing paranormal ever happened in the hotel. Despite its age and unique history, I checked every single room of that building every single day, completely alone, and I never saw any evidence of the paranormal at all. No guest ever reported anything weirder than the crappy AC not working, because the owner was too cheap to replace it. Once we had a maid claim that the largest suite was haunted, and she refused to ever set foot back in there, but I honestly just think she wanted to permanently get out of having to clean the biggest room we had. So, I'm sorry to say it, guys, but I have 0 scary stories about the hotel. Well, 1. But it's barely my story, so I won't tell it unless one of you asks me to. Anyways, the point is that I used to run a hotel, and as a hotel manager, I would often get free or discounted tickets to events and tourist attractions around the city. These tickets were meant to be used by myself and our front desk staff so that if a guest ever asked, what fun activities in the city should I make sure to see during my stay? The staff could honestly recommend places that they'd definitely been to and give them a genuine account of how they enjoyed their experience. One October, I received tickets to the haunted tour that always appears during the few weeks leading up to Halloween. My front desk manager and I were the only 2 who were brave enough to go. I had already been on several haunted walks across our country, and she had heard a few of my spooky life experiences, so she was very eager to come too. Plus we had become best friends, so it was great to hang out together outside of work. I want to protect her privacy, so let's call her Alabama. My husband, of course, came too, as he is always my sidekick during haunted walks. All but one, but that's another story. The tour we decided to take included a walking tour of haunted locations in town and finished with an internal tour of the most famously haunted house in our city, possibly our country. I won't tell you the name of the house, but only to protect my privacy, no offense. I'll just call the house the governor's house. The walking tour before the big event was, as always, awesome. Very interesting stories, but since we didn't actually go into any of the reportedly haunted houses, nothing truly exceptional happened. However, I do remember that I had a growing need to pee. At one point, I actually swallowed my pride and asked our tour guide if we'd be seeing a haunted coffee shop so I could pop in to use a washroom, but much to my horror, she told me, "Oh, sorry, no. But there's a bathroom in the governor's house, and the plumbing still works, so you can use that. I don't think the caretakers will mind." With a blank stare on my face, I looked at her and hesitantly replied, "It's okay. I'll hold it." But by the time we got to the house, holding it wasn't an option. She gave us a brief history of the house and a retelling of the reported paranormal events. Apparently, the governor and his wife lived in the house. They ran the city until one day an angry mob of townsfolk broke in, ransacked the place, and ended them both. Since then, the caretakers who used to reside in the house have experienced many unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and worst of all, being violently shaken or slapped awake in the middle of the night, but then opening their eyes to see that no one is there. Needless to say, they no longer live in the house. Absolutely bursting with urgency, the first thing I did when we got into the house was lock myself in the first bathroom I saw. It was absolutely tiny, very dark, and definitely the last creepy place I wanted to be without my pants on. Not to my surprise, there was no lineup to use it. I said, "Okay, ghosts. Just hold off for a few minutes, okay? Let me just have my privacy in here, and then you can do anything you want to me after, okay?" I should really know better than to offer spirits a deal, but I was desperate, and I didn't want to spend the rest of the night with urine-soaked jeans on a cold October night, in front of my staff. I had clear priorities. When I emerged from the bathroom, everyone on the tour looked at me like I was nuts for going in there alone. Each one of them would have gladly chosen to pee their pants. The guide gave us permission to walk around the house freely, as long as we were careful not to break or take anything. Ala was eager to have her first ever ghost encounter, so the first thing she did was make us go down into the basement. One of the stories that the guide told us about was a rocking chair that was known to rock on its own, so Ala was determined to find it. And since nobody else was willing to go down to the basement, we had it completely to ourselves. Once we were downstairs, we saw 3 rooms. One was just a closet of mops and other cleaning supplies. Chores are very scary. To the left of it was an archway leading into a pitch-black room. I thought it strange that this was the only room in the house that didn't have its lights on. And to our immediate left at the foot of the stairs was a kitchen, which also had its own archway to the dark room. We decided to explore the kitchen first since we could see clearly in there. I loved the vintage plates, but Ala was fixated on finding a ghost and made a dash, alone, straight into the dark room. I sighed and followed her. This room was so dark that as soon as you entered it, you couldn't see your hand right in front of your face, which was weird because it was right next to the brightly lit kitchen, through a large open doorway, but no light dripped in. You could turn around and see the kitchen. And you could see the faint streetlights through the window, but the actual room itself was pitch black. Not wanting to accidentally bump into and break any priceless antiques, I took out my camera and started to aimlessly snap photos to get the light from the flash. It actually didn't occur to me until this moment that I should have used the flashlight app on my phone, but during creepy moments, you're prone to making quick and odd decisions. Every time I snapped a photo, I caught a glimpse of the room. It was a dining room, with a large wooden table dead center, but it wasn't the furniture that really caught my eye, it was footprints. It's hard for me to really explain it, but every time I took another photo, I could see large, bright blue footprints on the floor, 2 at a time, making their way around the table, coming closer. After about 4 or 5 photos, I was pretty sure that I saw what I saw, so I backed up, back into the kitchen. Back into the light. My husband and Ala looked at me, my face pale. I never noticed Ala passed me to go back into the kitchen, and they asked me what happened. All I said was, "I'll trick him." And I dashed to the other archway that led into the dark room from the hallway, expecting to snap a photo of the full body of the entity waiting for me near the kitchen, but I was so wrong. The only one about to be tricked was me, because when I took that picture and the camera flashed, All I could see was bright blue flashing right up in my eyes, only an inch from my face. He was right there, right in front of me. He was smarter than me, and he wanted to make sure that I knew it. I stumbled back, and I went straight up the stairs, just repeating, "I'm sorry. You win." And Allah and my husband quickly followed. Despite the weird encounter seconds earlier, we still wanted to see the rest of the house, so after I had a chance to catch my breath and tell them what just happened, we made our way upstairs to the bedrooms. Upstairs was uneventful. They were small rooms that were chained off to stop visitors from breaking anything. After that we left and stood out under a streetlight out front of the house to recount our experience. While my husband and Allah chatted, I decided to take one last photo at the property, this time from the outside. I didn't notice it at first, but while we were in the house, every light in the house was on, except for the dark room in the basement. But now, not 2 seconds later, looking into the house from the outside, it was reversed. Every light in the house was off, except for the dark room in the basement, where I could clearly see the rocking chair, on the other side of the dining room table, by the window. Another strange thing that happened that night was that absolutely none of the photos I took in that house were actually on my camera. Not a single one saved. My husband had even worse luck, as he told me that the moment we walked into the house, his fully charged camera just completely dropped dead. A flat, empty battery, the moment he crossed the threshold. But the most terrifying thing that I saw that night was that picture I took from outside the house. If you looked up to the second-story window, in the master bedroom, there are two distinct, bright yellow eyes floating in the darkness of the house staring directly at us down on the street below. When I showed this picture to my husband, he was so freaked out by it that he asked me to delete it immediately, because he didn't want it in our house. Being sneaky, I remember saving it on Facebook before I deleted the photo from my phone so I could share it with my friends. But after Halloween that year, I haven't been able to find the photo since. It's completely vanished, and no one I know can find the copies they saved of it either. I love visiting haunted places and cemeteries to interact with the paranormal. Here are some tried and true do's and don'ts for spiritual protection if you are into it. Proceed with caution, but by all means proceed. If you're like me, you may have a love for visiting all things haunted to see if you can photograph, record, or interact with and learn from spirits or ghosts. A ghost tour in an old prison, haunted hospital, or old cemetery is a great place to interact with departed souls and get your paranormal investigation on. There are several practices you can do to protect yourself while visiting an old prison so that you don't bring any unwanted spirits, dark entities, or bothersome psychic attachments back home with you. Paranormal attachments can range from bothersome to quite scary. So it's best to be proactive. Take it from me, been there, done that. Never again. Create layers of spiritual and psychic protection. Spiritual protection can take various forms or be a combination of different methods. It is when you either call upon any spiritual guide, angel, God, or any positive universal power, use an energetic protective shield, or utilize an object, such as crystals, talismans, or clothing. Here are the steps I follow to create layers of spiritual and psychic protection before visiting a haunted place. See what resonates with you. Step 1. Ask for protection. If you don't feel comfortable asking God, angels, or spirit guides directly for help, you can recite a mantra or invocation, such as, "I invoke the light within me. I am a clear and perfect channel. Light is my guide. I am a fully protected and sovereign being. Spirits, you are not allowed to attach yourself to my energy." It's important to remember that you are in command here. The paranormal will try to mess with you, especially the darker entities, but you are a sovereign being. Nothing can attach to you, touch you, or mess with you as long as you stand your ground. Be forceful if you need to. You are the boss of your body, embody that energy of courage and confidence. Step 2. Place an energy shield. After you've asked for protection, the next step is to energetically surround yourself in a spiritual shield. Shielding is an easy, fast, and effective way to protect yourself if you are in an area where negative energy might be. It only takes a moment, and it is done by asking your guides or angels to surround your body with a protective layer of light and energy. I like to ask Archangel Michael and Archangel Sandalphon to place me in a 5D shield of protection. Step 3. Use objects as protection. Another powerful way to protect yourself along with the energy shield is by wearing protective objects during your visit to the haunted cemetery. Religious icons, talismans, and crystals have their own energy and can help you feel safe, powerful, and protected if this resonates with your beliefs. Here are a few protective crystals you can use. All black crystals are grounding and protecting. Black tourmaline, grounding, protection, dispels/transmutes negative energy. Hematite, A grounding stone that enhances strength/clear thinking/common sense and focused energy. Tiger's Eye provides protection and gentle grounding. Black obsidian, a powerful cleanser of psychic smog created within your aura and a strong psychic protection stone. Step 4. Wear black clothes. In varied spiritual practices, the color black is often associated with removing hexes or curses or warding off negative spirits by making you invisible to them. The color itself absorbs negative energy just as it absorbs light from the sun. This is a color that also protects you from negative vibes. Thank you all for listening to the stories. We appreciate everyone who's reached this far. Have a great weekend, thank you.